Madame la Secrétaire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. We will now hear the presentation of Telus Communications Inc. Please introduce yourself and your colleagues, and you have 20 minutes for your presentation.
Merci. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, Commissioners. My name is Stephen Schmidt, and I'm Vice President, Federal Government and Regulatory Affairs with Telus. To my immediate right is Darren Nenwissel, President and CEO. Beside Darren are our expert witnesses, Dr. Christian Dipon, Dr. Robert Crandall, and Dr. Georg Serenci. To my left are Eric Idora, Director, Regulatory Affairs, Jim Senko, President, Telus Mobility, and Eros Badotto, EVP, Telus Technology, Strategy, and Business Transformation. In the second row of our panel are Kim Miller, Senior Regulatory Legal Counsel, Bruna Nardi, Director, Regulatory Affairs, Christopher McKenzie, Vice President, Marketing, and Cal Amory, Vice President, Telus Global Partner Solutions. Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. Today, I'd like to take the opportunity to explore what market failure that we are trying to solve with these proceedings. In my remarks, I will confirm, based on facts and evidentiary documentation, that the wireless industry in Canada is robustly competitive and effective in meeting quality and affordability goals, and I will also highlight the success that we have seen with facilities-based competition. Firstly, Canada is a global leader in wireless network performance. According to the February 2020 Mobile Network Experience Report from UK-based OpenSignal, Canada has the fastest wireless network in the world, behind only South Korea. This is a country that's 1/100th the size of Canada and has already deployed widely 5G technology. It's also worth noting that Telus' download speed of 75 megabits per second surpasses South Korea's national average download speed of 58.7 megabits per second. Year in and year out, our continued podium finishes in wireless network excellence go mostly unnoticed in our industry and across our country, but this is where the greatest value lies for our economy and for our society. In its December 2019 Speed Test Global Index, US-based Ookla confirmed that networks in Canada, including those in rural communities, are nearly twice as fast as networks in the United States. In fact, if rural Canada were a country, it would rank 12th in download speeds, outranking the US in 30th position. In its 2019 report titled The State of Rural Canada's Mobile Network Experience, OpenSignal found that rural Canada offers faster network speeds than every urban market in the US. Our globally recognized wireless infrastructure and 5G pre-provisioning are underpinned by our fibre network, which is also world-leading in respect of its deployment. In 2019, Telus' fibre subscriptions increased by 36 percentage points, exceeding the OECD average of 13 percentage points by nearly threefold. And at the end of 2019, 50% of our total fixed broadband subscriptions were on fibre, approximately twice the 26% average of OECD countries. It's also worth highlighting the sobering comparison in terms of fibre leadership in Australia versus here in Canada. Notably, in their government-run program, Australia spent 5,100 Australian dollars per premise to provide citizens with heterogeneous high-speed service, causing a significant liability for government and taxpayers alike. In stark contrast, Telus has expended circa $2,300 Canadian per premise to provide Canadians with ubiquitous urban and rural high-speed capabilities with no liability to the government and at no cost to taxpayers. Secondly, investments per subscriber in Canada are consistently amongst the highest on a global basis. As Dr. Crandall will attest, Canada has some of the highest levels of investment per wireless subscriber worldwide, with Canada investing twice the European average on a per-subscriber basis. Additionally, Canadian carriers consistently pay extremely high spectrum costs. In fact, our average spend is $340 per Canadian as compared to $200 in the US, $140 in Germany, and $30 in Japan. Moreover, in their 2020 study titled Key Cost Drivers of Wireless Service in Canada, Christensen and Associates reported that Canadian spectrum prices are 424% higher than its benchmark countries and 65% higher than the United States. Indeed, if spectrum costs were as low in Canada as those paid by European carriers, Canadian mobile rates could be 12% lower, as Dr. Crandall will exemplify in his remarks today. By way of example, in the AWS 700 megahertz and 600 megahertz auctions that occurred between 2008 and 2019, Canada's wireless carriers paid more than 2 times what was paid in the US for the same open spectrum. It is indeed frustrating for our investors that this spectrum was acquired in the belief of the continuity of facilities-based competition, yet here we are a short time later with this under review. Since 2000, Telus has invested almost $200 billion across our country, and it does not stop there. We are poised to inject another $40 billion into our country over the next 3 years, subject to the appropriate investment climate for those investments to take place. On top of all this, Telus has remitted more than $43 billion in total tax and spectrum payments to our federal, provincial, and municipal governments. Our industry balance sheets are not only building Canada's digital economy and digital society, but our tax remittances are also funding our roads and our bridges, our public education, our health care, our cultural pursuits, and our national defense. In an age of increased awareness and responsibility in respect of tax morality, this compares favorably with many of our much larger global peers. Thirdly, Canadians have access to a wide range of rate plans and wireless providers. Each province is home to at least 4 wireless carriers, which, as Dr. Crandall will attest, and as confirmed by the HHI, which measures market concentration, this is at the high end of normal for most developed nations. When combined with Canada's numerous flanker brands, there are a dozen or more brands operating in many markets in Canada well above the norm. And I would say that's not bad for a country with a population density 1/9 of the United States and 1/30 of Europe. Canadian carriers offer plans with endless data. They offer plans with device financing and pre-owned device options. And they offer this across premium, value, and discount brands, making wireless ownership accessible to all Canadians across all income quintiles. Dr. Crandall can also confirm that wireless markets cannot sustain a large number of carriers given the investment required and the pace and risk of technology change, coupled with the great need for economies of scope and scale to be realized. In fact, the deregulation and wireless consolidation we are seeing globally is in direct contrast to Canada's current trajectory, and this is worrying. Lastly, wireless pricing in Canada is amongst the most competitive in the world, and it's time for us to modernize our data pricing models in wireless. Canada's prices are below international benchmarks, according to the 2018 NERA pricing study. Furthermore, in its August and December reports, the CRTC confirmed that wireless prices, as well as the cost per gigabit, decreased by up to 35% and 28% respectively between 2016 and 2018. It's also important to note that Telus is not only meeting, but in fact exceeding the government's affordability goals as confirmed by Deloitte. Notably, the government website states that to achieve the 25% rate plan reduction goals, wireless services for a Canadian family of 4 should be circa $2,929 per year. There are numerous plans across Telus, Koodo, and our public brands that exceed these True North affordability targets and represent, on average, more than $400 in annual savings over the projected costs, again, as audited by Deloitte. In addition, the January to July 2019 StatsCan index value highlighted a decrease of nearly 8% for cellular services versus an increase of up to 15% in the average cost of food, shelter, and transportation in the same time frame. Similarly, an audit quality 2020 study by PricewaterhouseCoopers found that the average Canadian family spends circa 1.6% of their household income on wireless services, as compared to the US at 2.6% and as compared to Australia at 2.1%. Household expenditures across a wide range of products and services, including home phones, postage, photography, audio, video, and printed reading material, have been displaced by wireless services, increasing the disposable income of Canadians. And whilst data consumption is increasing by 26% annually, 90% of this growth can be attributed to entertainment and social networking. In essence, through this proceeding, Canadian carriers are being asked to subsidize access to Netflix, YouTube, social media, and the like. Not exactly a pressing national priority. It is incredible that Canada's communications companies have realized significant achievements despite the numerous challenges that we face, including operating in one of the highest cost jurisdictions in the world in respect of deploying infrastructure and technology. This is due to a number of factors that reinforce the diseconomies of scale inherent within our borders, and these are inclusive of our vast geography, our rugged topography, and our challenging climate. They include our low population density, our excessively high spectrum costs, and our high labor rates and tax system. We are also impacted constantly by U.S.-Canadian exchange rate fluctuations. With Nortel gone and BlackBerry shifting away from smartphones, we now operate in a network equipment and device oligopoly with a preponderance of our network components and devices purchased in U.S. dollars. In fact, we are dependent on just 2 major device providers that set rigid prices for our industry in Canada. Given the backdrop of these achievements, against the inherent challenges, why then is government intervention in the form of mandated MVNOs needed in the wireless industry in Canada? Let's ask some questions. Do we have in Canada a network quality issue to solve for? No, we do not. Endless independent studies have proven that Canada is a global leader in network performance and network deployment. Indeed, the world-leading investment we are making in technology and infrastructure is enabling the diversity, innovation, and competitiveness of our private sector. It is also supporting economic growth and job creation for our nation, and as well, helping us answer society's most pressing social challenges in health, in education, and in respect of the environment, whilst improving economic equality in our increasingly digital world. Indeed, our technology leadership and the investments that underpin it drive our country's innovation agenda and the resulting economic and social outcomes that flow from it. This begs the question, do we have an investment problem in Canada that we need to solve for? No, we do not. The level of investment per subscriber in Canada is amongst the highest on earth, as substantiated by numerous third-party reports. Notably, our collective investment in 5G technology will offer a $40 to $50 billion annual uplift to our country's GDP within a 6-year period, and it will enable another quality 250,000 permanent skilled jobs in Canada to be created. These benefits are contingent on a circa $30 billion investment by the telecommunications sector, an investment that I say will be diluted and deferred should mandated MVNOs come to fruition. Do we have a service issue in Canada? No, we do not. There is healthy competition in our country with a wide range of rate plans and service providers across all geo markets. In fact, Telus's consistently world-leading postpaid churn rate of less than 1% demonstrates that a significant number of customers are choosing to stay with Telus despite the numerous other options that are available to them. So then, do we have a wireless affordability issue in Canada? Surprisingly, no, we do not. As confirmed by successive third-party studies, wireless pricing in Canada is amongst the most competitive in the world, with our country's unlimited plans ranking best, #1 in the G7, based on speed, latency, accessibility, and yes, pricing. Clearly, competition is alive and well in our country. It's fueling our country's global leadership in respect of network superiority, service excellence, and affordability, whilst enabling positive economic and social outcomes for Canadians. So again, I ask, what market dysfunctionality are we trying to solve? Mandated MVNOs will undermine innovation and investment in Canada, including 5G deployments and the benefits inherent in this technology evolution, whilst negatively impacting job security and creation. Communications companies will be unable to maintain the $50 billion our wireless industry contributes to our economy each year, the equivalent of 2.5% of our country's GDP. Let's consider what has happened in other jurisdictions with mandated MVNOs. These jurisdictions concluded that more players in the market were not viable, given the technology investment required and the consistent pace of change inherent within our industry. Christian Dupont of Nera Consulting confirmed that there is no evidence of an MVNO successfully transitioning to an MNO. Studies, experience, and evidence have demonstrated that there is no potential long-term consumer upside from a sustainable retail MVNO market. If we want to evolve the regulatory model, let's build on facilities-based competition and liberalize our foreign ownership rules, per my testimony to the Competition Policy Review Panel 12 years ago. Let's open the market to foreign investment and allow market forces to continue to drive the best consumer outcomes. It now seems forgotten that 20 years ago, Telus was the original new entrant. Yet, with significant investment and, yes, considerable business impact along the way, we built a successful national organization. We achieved this with facilities-based competition, and our country has benefited greatly. So it is possible. With networks that are the envy of the world and declining wireless prices that are already below international benchmarks, competition in Canada is clearly working.
Thank you, Darren. The Commission has a unique opportunity in this proceeding to take holistic account of Canada's mobile market performance to calibrate and inform broader government action. Importantly, the Commission is not seeking to be re-elected in the next 18 months and has a longer time horizon and a wider view than that afforded by the pressures and pragmatism of day-to-day politics and the media. We know that this hearing room, this process, and this institution are more than an antechamber to the minister's office. This process and this institution afford Canadians the ability to chart a different path forward, one anchored in fact and expertise, in order to deliver meaningful and durable benefits for the country.
Canada continues to benefit from a competitive wireless industry, an industry that is less concentrated than the wireless industries in all but 2 developed countries in the world, Denmark and Sweden. In a regulatory environment that has relied heavily on platform competition, Canadian carriers have invested far more per subscriber than have European carriers, who have been traditionally much more regulated. There's no credible evidence that the 3 national wireless carriers have market power. Evidence of differences in pricing across metropolitan areas advanced by the Competition Bureau is not credible because it's based on ARPU, the average revenue per user, not the price of wireless services. The price of wireless service has been declining in the last few years as ARPU has been steadily increasing because lower prices induce more data consumption. And as Dr. Dupont has shown, Canadian wireless prices are generally below an appropriately designed international benchmark. Nor are profit margins a measure of market power. The 3 national wireless carriers have been forced to invest much more in spectrum than their European counterparts because of the government policy of setting aside a large share of spectrum for smaller carriers. These set-asides result in very high spectrum prices and therefore large investments in spectrum that must be recovered by carrier revenues. If the government wishes to reduce wireless prices, it could begin by reforming this inefficient spectrum policy.
There are 3 reasons why the Commission should not mandate MVNO access. First, it is unnecessary. Independent assessments show that market forces are working properly. I'm aware of the evidence put forth by the Competition Bureau that alleges an uncompetitive marketplace, and I've carefully reviewed it. Unfortunately, the Competition Bureau study is wrong. Second, a mandate for MVNO access in Canada will not be effective. The impact of MVNOs have been studied and restudied. Every time, studies conclude that MVNOs are niche players that do not want to compete with the incumbents. There is no disagreement on this. Finally, mandated MVNO access will ultimately harm Canadians. An MVNO policy will create a negative investment incentive for all facility-based providers in Canada, with no material consumer benefits but clear negative repercussions. An MVNO mandate is net negative for Canadians. It is for this precise reasons that 33 of the 36 OECD regulators have chosen to refrain from intervening in the MNO-MVNO relationship.
Telus asked me to take a closer look at the regulatory situation for MVNOs in Europe. I have 4 messages for you. First, why fix what's not broken? It is best international regulatory practice that if there is no competition problem, no regulation should be imposed. Second, there are no mandated MVNOs in Europe and other parts of the world, except for special cases which are not relevant for Canada. Third, mandating MVNOs is a solution in search of a problem. MVNOs are usually subscale players not able to set retail prices. The tail cannot wag the dog. Fourth, regulators in some jurisdictions have considered introducing mandated MVNOs and declined to do so. Other regulators have lifted existing MVNO obligations because the obligation has proved to be ineffective and the anticipated effects on competition did not materialize. To sum up, the regulation that the CRTC envisions is unprecedented and counterproductive because it's massively intrusive and will ultimately damage the investment case for 5G. Canada should not rely on mandated MVNOs at regulated prices, first because it's not effective, and second because such a measure would put Canada in an outlier position that is toxic for investment and detrimental for Canada's economic future.
To conclude, we have 4 recommendations for the Commission. First, the Commission should make findings of fact about Canada's mobile wireless market performance across all dimensions: network reach, network quality, performance, capital levels, service, pricing. Second, the Commission should act on the key price drivers that are within government control. The Commission should permit device financing for up to 36 months and make recommendations for more efficient auction design in Canada. Both device costs and auction outcomes are putting upward pressure on retail rates in Canada. Third, in order to facilitate and incent 5G development, the Commission should refrain from increasing roaming obligations, such as mandating seamless roaming, and limit existing roaming to 4G network speeds. Finally, and most importantly, the right regulatory environment for 5G deployment demands that the Commission decline to mandate MVNO access. It is not justified based on the performance of the industry. It will not benefit consumers. And most fundamentally, it will make no contribution to the $26 billion in investment needed to roll out 5G networks in Canada. In fact, it fundamentally guarantees that 5G will not be rolled out in areas with weaker business cases, rural, remote, smaller towns, areas in Canada that need broadband the most. These communities and Canada cannot afford to be left behind in the 5G race. Thank you. We welcome your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your submission. Commissioner McDonald.
Good morning and welcome. Thanks for your comments this morning and for your involvement throughout this process. Just to start off, I'd like to talk a little bit about the definition of the product market, because most parties to this proceeding have defined the product market as including voice, text, and data services, but Telus has taken a different approach. And at paragraph 51 of your May 15th submission, you note that first there is the market for mobile wireless connection. Second, once the connection is established, there's a second market for data usage. And I'm wondering, can you unpack that for me and tell me the rationale for coming to that conclusion?
The rationale is quite simple. I mean, obviously, for mobility, for access to the mobile network, the market is the wireless market, the wireless access market. But for usage, people with wireless handsets, with tablets, with everything else, have access to data, even to voice over internet protocol, through a variety of places. Wi-Fi hotspots, which are very numerous in Canada and very high quality, and many of which are free. An extremely high quality fixed network, which people can use for accessing data and downloading data as a substitute for data which is downloaded over the mobile network.
So, pardon me, but I don't think that services like landline and Wi-Fi are what initially jump into people's minds when they're thinking about the mobile wireless network, specifically because they're not mobile. So I guess, would you care to comment on that? I mean, they lack the specific characteristic of being mobile.
Well, every time I go to a Starbucks, I see people on their Wi-Fi system with their wireless devices, be they tablets, be they wireless handsets, downloading data. That certainly is a substitute for stepping outside of Starbucks and downloading data.
So the number of people that opt not to take a landline connection and instead go exclusively on wireless, I think reflects the holistic decision people make in terms of having fixed line connectivity versus a wireless service, and more they're choosing uniquely just the wireless service.
So that ties back into the comments you made in your opening remarks around prices in Canada are what they are. Some may say high, some may say low, but wireless service does serve as a substitute and replace other costs that Canadians would have traditionally had to absorb.
That is correct. My comments, however, were inadequate because they were just the sampling. They don't take into account what it does to enable the efficiency of consumer lifestyles. So by way of example, with everyone in the family having a phone and parents having to pick their kids up after school, to be able to coordinate those logistics provides for a much more efficient family experience, much more human family experience, and less money is wasted and waiting around or gasoline or logistics along the way. The other aspects that we could extend into would be security. We could talk about telecommuting and the way that people can now work from home and be mobile within their home in that regard, both on the macro wireless network, but also leveraging Wi-Fi connectivity.
Okay, just for the interest of completeness, can you identify for me the total list of services that would fall into your usage bucket as you see it versus into your connection bucket?
We can undertake to do so.
Oh, sorry.
We can undertake to do so, Commissioner MacDonald.
Perfect, thank you. By March the 10th.
Thank you very much.
With respect to prices, you've noted our own studies have shown that prices in Canada are declining. But can you perhaps quantify that in relation to how rates are declining in other countries? Because Canada is not unique. Rates are going down in many different jurisdictions, perhaps at a different speed. How do we fare when ranked against other nations at the speed of the rate decreases?
I'll be happy to shed some light on that. It's a difficult undertaking because prices are not easily measured. First, I wanted to make a comment on, I saw the Competition Bureau made the claim that prices are decreasing less rapidly in Canada relative to other countries. I just want to caution everybody that is relying on a very flawed report that is annually conducted, and that should really not give you an indication of what's happening in Canada relative to other countries. I think what's much more informative, and it's a term I've been using for a while, is the mobile value proposition. And so when you look at the mobile value proposition, you take into account what you're paying, what your monthly price is, but what you're getting for it in terms of network attributes, in terms of plan attributes, and country attributes. When you do that comparison, you will see that Canadian prices are below, actually quite significantly below the average price relative to the international benchmark. So going back to your question then is, does it decline slower in Canada? I don't think anybody has the response to that. But it is already below the average. So even if we were to drop slower, if it were, then it's still going to be below the average. Or stated differently, if it were to drop as fast as other countries per the Bureau, then Canada will become the cheapest country in the world.
My colleague Jim would like to add.
Thanks, Stephen. I'd also like to add that our peace of mind no overage data plans are cheaper than the U.S. when you convert to Canadian dollars. So we start at 75, Verizon and AT&T are at 90. Advertising of published prices can often be misleading because the U.S. carriers publish their family of 4 prices versus their single unit prices. So it's unclear whether our single unit prices are being compared against multi-unit discounted prices. And in addition, the Wall report is not updated to reflect the actual prices in Canada. As examples, level 1 is Canada is indicated at $25 Today, it's $15 on public mobile. Level 3 indicates $70.99. Today, it's $25 on public mobile and $45 on Koodo. Level 5 indicates $87. Today, it's $38 on public and $55 on Koodo. And level 6 indicates $227, and today it's $75 on Telus and Koodo. Those rate plans would look very favorably globally.
Just sticking with global comparisons for a minute, we heard from, I believe it was Bell yesterday, and they commented on the fact that many of the studies don't take into account gift with purchase options that are available in Canada, some of them stretching into the $850 to $1,000 range, which can equate to, if you divide that over the 24-month service plan, can equate to $35 or $40 a month. Are such offers typical in the international market, or is that more unique to Canada when comparing prices?
I'm not sure with respect to gift cards, but promotions are very common. So I'll give you an example in the United States. Family plans. Family plans have become very popular, though many of the international ranking comparisons don't take them into account. So if you were to look, I think there's one report that keeps repeatedly stating that the United States does not have unlimited plans. Well, that's not true, but they are part of family plans. So there's heavy promotions in if you get like 4 lines, and promotions should be included in international ranking exercises, and they do incur internationally as well.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to add a bit about the Canadian market. Last year, 46 out of 52 weeks, the Canadian market was under promotion. 60% of our plans are on promotional plans. The typical discounts include gift cards up to $500, double data, free tablets, $10 discounts off the rate plan, an unrecoverable subsidy that would equate to about $10 per month.
Thank you for that additional information. Some parties have suggested that the timing of the introduction of new plans in the market with no overage charges and rate discounts as of late may not be a reaction to increased competition, but may be more a threat based on what might be in a given political party's platform or the threat of regulatory intervention coming out of this proceeding. And I just want to give you an opportunity to comment on that.
Yeah, I'll take that. In August 2018, we received board approval to a major simplification transformation, which was aimed to introduce no overage plans, family discounts, 0% financing with all devices starting at $0, and bring it back, which is providing upfront, affordable discounts to customers if they bring back their device at the end of their contract. Our objective was to simplify customer experience by creating device transparency and no overages. We reduced our rate plans from over 250 to less than 10. The motivation was to reduce call volume to our call centers, improve throughput in our stores, make bundling easier, and give our customers a great experience and continue our leadership in churn. Shaw Big Gig plans were not the driver, as data sharing plans at the time and bonus data was very effective in managing our market share, but was complicated to support. The time to launch effectively and fantastically was due to systems development and building the appropriate network capacity. So we started and endeavored this program back in August, actually even before August of 2018.
We can furnish you with evidentiary documentation in terms of our board material so that you can see that governance timeline and that you can see the decision to proceed with our endless data plans is independent of either a political bent or a influence from a particular competitor. I think that might be helpful if you got some insight into our decision making and had clarity that this was driven by our customers first philosophy at Telus.
I agree, that would be very helpful, so thank you for the offer to undertake to provide that information as well. I'll draw your attention next to CRTC exhibits 1A and B, which I believe you were provided with copies at the start of the proceeding. And you know, historically, when we've been looking at prices across the country, we've often seen that prices in Saskatchewan and Manitoba were lower than other regions, both on primary and flanker brands. Now we're seeing it's more consistent across the country, with the exception of lower prices now appearing in Quebec versus the rest of the country. And I'm just wondering if you can provide me with some information on why you think this shift is happening.
Thank you for your question. When we look at the average rate plan price for an activation across our provinces, actually British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and Atlantic are all exactly the same. Alberta is slightly higher, and that is because of mix. So Alberta has the highest mix of our premium Telus brand at 75%, and Quebec is about $5 lower than the average. Quebec has consistently been lower than the rest of the country and was lower even before Videotron Wireless. And two things that are notable in buying behaviors in Quebec. The first one is that customers take data plans with less data, about 30% less data than the rest of the country. And secondly, there is a much higher mix of flanker brands versus premium brands in Quebec. For us, 55% of our subscribers and our activations are on Public and Koodo versus Telus. And so when you start to look at ARPU, it can be misleading. It's not that prices are necessarily different. It has a lot to do with buying behaviors and the mix of purchases between the different brands.
So when you are, well, let me back up. Could you outline what factors go into determining the price in a given market? You've outlined a couple, the presence of flanker brands, added competition. Are there other factors that come into play when you're trying to decide on the price point in a given region?
We look, firstly, when we price, we determine our pricing provincially. So our pricing is provincially. We look at our market share. We look at our network quality. We look at brand awareness. And we look at our competitors' pricing. And we put that together and determine what is the best way for us to drive profitable market share growth. You know, so additionally, we will decide to market different brands in different provinces. So, for example, in Alberta, there's just high awareness around Telus. Customers like to bundle with their home services. We tend to market more of Telus. In Quebec, we market more Koodo and Public Mobile because they resonate more with the buying behaviors in those provinces. So those are the criteria that go behind how we price.
And you said that you typically price based on province. Is that the smallest geography that you would price to, or do you go to a sub-provincial level based on certain characteristics in a given part of the province, more competition in a certain part of the province, the availability to offer other services in one city versus another in a given geography? Do you ever go smaller than province-wide?
All of our published pricing is provincial. What we will do locally is we will put more marketing dollars behind, say, a Koodo value proposition if we think that that would have a greater chance of winning market share. We also have promotional pricing. Promotional pricing is usually done at the province level, but we do leave some discretion for our store managers to flex pricing tools locally as they see fit, but it's not a predetermined, we're going to price like this in this submarket.
And you mentioned in your opening comments and in your interventions the large number of weeks that you have promotional offers in market over a given 52-week period. Are those generally spread across your service area, or do the bulk of perhaps regions with higher levels of competition, are they able to realize more discounts or discounts more frequently than other regions?
Ironically, our two most intense competitive markets for promotional activity is Ontario, and more specifically the GTA, and Lower Mainland BC. We see more intense pricing in those provinces than we do in the regions.
Thank you. We talked a moment ago about the fact that prices have been declining, particularly in the last year or so. That could be a result of increased competition. There could be other factors at play as well. And I'm wondering if you can give me or unpack for me what other factors go into pricing your service, cost to deliver, what prices have gone down, what efficiencies have been found that enable you to offer lower prices to your clients?
So I think a great example is to look at our peace of mind no overage plans. Those price plans are significantly lower than what were in the market previously from the data sharing plans. But a number of things went into factor there. So factor number one is with no overage charges is the number one driver of customer care call volume, for example. Complexity of subsidy plans where the customers can't identify the cost of a device versus the rate plan make the amount of time to process an activation or an upgrade in the store longer. The price point at $75 becomes more attractive to customers who are in flanker brands like Fido, Virgin, Freedom, or Koodo. And so all of those things went into a calculation that said, you know what, not only is that $75 price point amazing for our customers and easier for our employees to support, but we can provide those plans at a lower cost, and we can improve the mix between our flanker brands and our premium brands in order to manage our ARPU. So those are the kinds of considerations that go into our pricing.
And also the cost factors of production that I alluded to in my remarks. So we do represent one of the highest cost to serve jurisdictions in the world. We have significant diseconomies of scale given the demographics of our country. The geography, the topography, and the climate are challenging and drive significant relative increases in costs in Canada versus other developed nations in that regard. As it relates to data growth, one of the things that we need to be cognizant of is that data growth is consumptive of spectrum. And when we've got data growing fast and consuming spectrum, and we pay the highest spectrum costs in the world, 2 to 3 times higher than many of our peers, that also factors into our thinking. As it relates to devices, as airtime has reduced, either holistically at 35% since 2016 or 28% 18 over 17 on a per gigabit basis. We are in an environment where the device costs have gone up, and they've gone up markedly. If you look at what smartphones cost several years ago and how they've gone from the $500 to the $1,000 to the $1,500 to the $2,000 level, that also is front of mind, whether it's recovering the subsidy component of that or whether it's giving $0 financing on those devices overall. As it relates to other aspects of our cost challenges, it's clear that from the labor perspective, relative to the international benchmark group that we're compared against, we pay higher labor costs to the middle-class Canadians that work for our organizations to give the quality of service that we want to afford our customers. We pay higher taxes along the way. And we also have to work through the very challenging oligopoly structure that we face in terms of both network equipment as well as the duopoly model that we see inherent within our device supply channel along the way. So when we think about setting prices, one of the things that we look at is will we make a return over the contract period or not? And that tempers how deep we go during those promotional periods that Jim referred to, which do very much take up nearly the preponderance of the 52 weeks of the year. And then holistically, on the affordability front, going from provincial to national, I do think the PwC study, given the audit level of robustness that was invested in that study and looking at affordability as it relates to disposable income, comparing us to the U.S. and Australia, there is quite a marked difference at 1.6% in Canada versus the plus 2% at both the U.S. and Australia. And that's true, importantly, across all income quintiles rather than just a segment thereof. And also taking the concept of affordability and extenuating it to talk about value. And it's important to note that on a G7 comparative basis, including the G7 plus Australia, Canada gets better value determined by a composite of price, latency, accessibility, and coverage considerations along the way. We are #1 ranked amongst the G7 plus Australia in that regard. And when we look at the Liberal website right now postulating 4 variants on a 25% price reduction, it's interesting to note that we offer better prices today on every single one of those 4 variants, where the differences are ranging from $50 better to $1,000 better, with an average of $400 better in that regard. And I do think that that speaks to the affordability within the Canadian context in a way that is quite considerable, but also extends the thought of affordability into the value construct as it relates to the productivity of our economy and our society.
Thank you. We will spend quite a bit of time talking about affordability issues in my questioning. Just one final one before I move on. You offered to provide us information via an undertaking with respect to the internal journey, the internal decision-making process that was undertaken to offer more competitive plans in market. When factors do align that reduce the cost to deliver service for customers, what is the time delay between those efficiencies being realized and when you can actually pass those benefits off to the customers? Because I understand if you're putting a no overage plan into market, there's various internal approvals you'll need to go to. But from the buying public, it seemed like when such plans came to the market, they came very rapidly and in close succession between various different providers for more robust offers as of late.
So I think the first thing that I would break down for you is it was important to us to launch 3 things together, which was the no overage plans, the 0% financing and creating the separation between the rate plan and the device, because that was overage and transparency on the device were the two #1 concerns of our clients. And the third one was to offer credible and valuable family discounts. So we wanted to launch the three together. The majority of the system's work was linked to the financing and the family discounts and overhauling our rate plans. Doing a no overage plan is just a rate plan change. We could have launched that, we could have launched it sooner, but they worked together, and it was important to us to launch them together in unison. So when Rogers did launch their unlimited plan, we did follow because we were losing market share, but we held back all of our major marketing until we could launch them all together on July 3rd, as was the original plan.
Thank you.
I think Dr. Crandall wants to follow.
Oh, yes, please.
I just wanted to point out, we've said before, this is a highly competitive industry. It's not only Telus's costs that are going down, but Rogers and Bell's costs are going down. And an important criterion for their pricing are what the other carriers are doing. As they lower their prices because costs go down, Telus has to meet those price reductions in order to be able to compete. That's the nature of a competitive market.
I want to add one more thing. Like, we're anchoring on the peace of mind plans as being the great innovation. I want to remind you that Telus has been an innovator in leading price innovations. We were first to market in introducing the Kudo tab. We were first to market in innovating Kudo shock-free data. We were the first to market with 0% financing. We were the first to market with Bring It Back. We were the first to market with Telus Family Discount. We were the first to market with Kudo offering unlimited talk and text. We were the first to market in marketing certified pre-owned devices. So creating a perception that, you know, magically there was a major change in pricing right before the hearings is a false narrative when you look at the price innovations that we have done over the years, and that this was the next evolution for us.
Okay, and I will get back to perception in a little bit. You mentioned earlier about the abundance of Wi-Fi hotspots in the country. I believe in your intervention, the count as of 2017 was around 40,000 across the country. But we've heard from many Canadians that say they have to rely on Wi-Fi almost solely because their mobile rates are so high. And if mobile rates were lower in the country, they would not be forced and would not access those Wi-Fi hotspots to the same degree that they do today. Would you care to comment on that?
Dr. Crandall, to start off, please.
Well, the price at many of these Wi-Fi hotspots is zero. I mean, it may be true that a slightly lower price for mobile data would induce a little less substitution of Wi-Fi hotspot. But keep in mind also the landline at home is a substitute. I mean, we're using these devices now for downloading entertainment. When someone sits next to you in an airplane and watches a movie on his phone, ask him if he downloaded it off the mobile network or from a Wi-Fi hotspot or from his home Wi-Fi. I'll bet you'll find very rarely that he downloaded off the Wi-Fi, off the mobile network, regardless of what the price was.
And if I just may, just follow up on that, I'm a bit puzzled by the feedback you received from the consumers for the reasons Dr. Crandall mentioned, especially in the past, Wi-Fi has been faster for download speeds, and like Dr. Crandall mentioned, incremental cost is zero, versus on the mobile side it is not. So I would view it as, in many instances, if you're in proximity of a Wi-Fi hotspot, it might be the better alternative to take. So I'm a bit surprised that a subscriber would then argue that I have two options. I have Wi-Fi, fast, reliable. I have mobile wireless, also fast and reliable. But here I have an incremental cost. Here I have zero incremental cost. Why would I ever want to go for mobile wireless in that instance?
Well, there is a convenience factor. If someone wants to download something, they have to find a Wi-Fi connection versus just download it on their phone if they're on the wireless network.
Correct. So that's my example was in the presence of both options. You're right, if only one is available, but I think your point was that the consumer would have liked to use the wireless network when Wi-Fi was available.
And into a 5G world where, there will be much greater speeds than are currently available today. Does that remove one of the differentiators in the consumer's mind between I want to download this movie, no, I have to go to my home Wi-Fi or sit in Starbucks, or no, I'll just download it off the Wi-Fi, the 5G network?
Let me jump on this. A view from Europe. Europe-wide, EU-wide, there's one roaming zone, so everybody takes its plan within the EU. Nevertheless, there is a program which is called Wi-Fi for EU, and that is supporting from the European Commission the build-out of 10,000 of public Wi-Fi stations. And that's not only for people coming from outside. It's an additional convenience factor which gives people the opportunity to use fast Wi-Fi connections. And under a 5G scenario, we have also Wi-Fi 6, which will open the 6 gigahertz band for public Wi-Fi. So there will be always this dichotomy, so to say, between Wi-Fi and the mobile network. And Wi-Fi goes cellular in a way, technology-wise.
Just to answer your question, Commissioner, I do believe that quality differences, I expect that quality differences will diminish over time, but the deployment of 5G is yet to come, and there's quite a few obstacles in place until consumers can enjoy 5G services.
I just wanted to top up as well. Look, it's hard to bucket. Customers don't fall neatly into bite-sized segments. Everyone has different preferences. We serve many different needs in the marketplace. So, we provide entry-level data plans starting at $15. We provide talk and text plans starting at $8.33. Public Mobile offers unlimited talk and text and a gig of data from $23 or 77 cents a day. Our no overage plans, we offer family discounts, which dramatically reduce the price, for a family of 3 or a family of 4. We, provide discounts for customers who have home services with us. These are all ways that we're making that affordable. And another reason for moving towards peace of mind and 0% device financing was in anticipation of 5G and the realization that, the data usage profiles are going to get bigger, and so we wanted larger buckets, and that we want people to use the phones, and that's why we eliminated data overage.
Okay, just switching
May
gears.
I just add one point?
Yep.
I think it's important to also consider how Wi-Fi is evolving. I think Georg mentioned it, but we're heading from Wi-Fi 5 to Wi-Fi 6, and that is going to create much more capability in Wi-Fi. And you need to look at the devices. Devices are not omitting Wi-Fi in them. They're actually advancing Wi-Fi in them, because Wi-Fi as an alternative will continue to be something that is used by subscribers. So not only is the landline infrastructure, the fiber infrastructure, the Wi-Fi infrastructure getting advanced, but so are the devices to accept it. And I think you'll continue to find that balance between people using Wi-Fi where available and then using 4G, 5G where available.
Okay. Switching gears to network quality for a few moments. Bell commissioned a study by Charles River and Associates that concluded that price variations across the country were tied to differences in network quality. And if I'm to believe that, I could assume that the quality of the networks in Quebec, for example, are significantly lower. what factors account for differences in network quality?
I think I can give you some directions. I cannot give you magnitudes, but when I did my regression work looking at explaining differences in prices across the world, what generally drives it are three categories. It's what I call plan attributes, network attributes, and country attributes. So prices are driven by the richness of the plan, be that voice minutes, data allowance, SMS, maybe overage as well. Then on the network side, the network quality is part of that. So say download speeds, coverage, 4G take-up, things like that. And then the third part that explains prices are what I call the country attributes, and those would be the size of the country, population density, and so forth. So I would agree that quality plays an important part. I would probably say it's a bit more complex than just saying it's just quality.
And
if I may chime in,
yeah.
I think this is an interesting conversation because I will speak for us. Creating a quality network is complicated. We live in a complicated industry, but it's very you can sum it up. Like what do you need to create a quality network? So you need factors of inputs, right? Probably the biggest input you need is spectrum. Spectrum drives it's the beachfront upon which these networks are built. Number of sites come into play, terrain come into play. Backhaul. Do you have the right kind of backhaul to create these networks? And so those all come into play. The reality is, though, as we construct our networks, we have the same service definition across the country. In fact, I would say we have two service definitions across the country, one that would be for major cities and one for rural, given that rural is much harder to get all these other things built into. We don't make a distinction between, call it a Montreal and a Vancouver. They have the same service desires, same service designs, and perform largely the same for us.
So just to unpack that a little bit further, are there significant variations in network quality across your country or across your company as you traverse the country? Is there a strong or a large difference between what a Telus customer in an urban center can expect versus what a rural customer can expect?
There would be, I would say that if there are differences, they're temporal in nature as we kind of continue to build out and add to our networks. In the cities, they're largely the same. As we move into the rural territories, because there is less spectrum available and, frankly, higher expenses to build, they will have a lesser level of performance. However, I will say that, in the past number of years, we in particular have specifically built out wireless HSIA services for folks in the rural territories, and they are actually getting a very good service to the point where we have, tens of thousands of subscribers using what is our wireless networks, what would be considered a mobile network for a fixed service.
And are there variations in quality when you look between your various brands versus, Telus proper versus Koodo, for example?
So there is a difference between public mobile versus Koodo and Telus. So Koodo and Telus are both 4G. Public speeds are 3G speeds, which are between 3 and 6 megabits per second. And those speeds are very acceptable for email, text, web browsing, social media, streaming music, and even based on the Netflix definition of standard video quality, supporting Netflix and YouTube. Now, if we were providing a subpar service to public, then the other dimension wouldn't be true, in my view, which is that public is our fastest growing brand. Most of our, not most, but the largest number of activations last year were on public. So it's a very healthy brand right now, and customers love the value proposition.
To answer your question directly, in terms of quality differences between Telus and Koodo, there are no quality differences between Telus and Koodo.
Okay, thank you. Changing again to profitability. Is that a good indicator of the level of competition in a country? Because many interveners have argued that the three largest providers are very profitable enterprises, and it's an indicator that the market is not competitive.
I've seen nothing in the record that goes to profitability. I've seen a lot of discussion of profit margins. But keep in mind, profits are a return to capital. So it depends on how much capital you have invested per dollar of sales in order to evaluate the profit margin. Profit margins may be relatively high in Canada because the capital investment required, that is, plant and equipment and spectrum, is much higher than it is in other countries. But nobody has done a thorough analysis of the profitability of carriers in Canada versus the profitability of carriers in the United States or Europe based upon a return to capital, and also looking at the appropriate cost of capital given the risk of investing in that country, which of course depends upon the regulatory climate.
On that particular question, we have done a poor job as an industry reflecting the economics of our business. So that we're not singularly viewed through the lens of a profit and loss statement, and more properly viewed through a cash flow statement. And I'll give you a direct illustration of that. Between 2014 and 2019, over that particular 6-year period, Telus's cumulative free cash flow was minus $6 billion. So we had, in terms of cash outflows versus inflows, our cash outflows exceeded our inflows by $6 billion. That's audited. You can have the evidentiary documentation audited by Deloitte. That negative $6 billion relates to three key factors. One is related to our fiber build, which is both urban and rural. The second factor is related to succession of spectrum auctions over that period, where we expended more than $4 billion. And thirdly is the pre-provisioning that we've undertaken to get ready for 5G. But we are net negative $6 billion between 2014 and the end of 2019.
So are cash flows a better measure of the industry than profitability would be, given its capital-intensive nature? Yes,
exactly, and it was our fault that we've not illustrated it that way. But when you look at the amount of CapEx that we expend as an industry, which is amplified by the number of technology rollovers that take place as we've gone from 1G analog to 2G to 3G to 4G, and now on the cusp of 5G. And every time we undertake a technology evolution, that is a major network lift for this organization. And in addition to that, the amounts of money that we have spent on spectrum and how it's not just a nominal amount, but on a unit cost basis, that differentiates us negatively versus our global peer group. And if you add that to the subsidization model that we've had to endure as it relates to devices, those economics have been exceedingly challenging. But factoring in the capital cost to the exact point that you're making, Commissioner McDonald, is not something that we have done effectively. And you're quite right, we should have done it. And a cash flow view is a much more accurate view of our industry.
Okay, thank you. Still on the topic of investments, because you mentioned the need to, periodically forklift up the network, to use a different term. Your LTE and LTE Advanced deployments are essentially done across the country. Would that be a correct assessment?
That would be a correct assessment in respect of over 99% coverage of Canadians with LTE.
So
and 90% of rural Canada.
So how does investment intensity vary depending on the different stages of your deployment of a given technology? You're probably getting towards the end investing significantly in LTE in advance. I'm just wondering what the next wave is going to be 5G. So what as you deploy, how will capital intensity vary over the course of your deployment of 5G?
So typically, in a year where we're not undertaking a technology rollover, and they have been few and far between during my tenure here, and we're in a year where we're not having a spectrum auction, our CapEx intensity for our wireless business would range from 11 to 13%. In a year where we are undertaking a technology rollover or undertaking a spectrum auction, it would be significantly north of that particular amount. The half-life for Telus these days on a technology rollover is 18 months.
Could I add to that? There's an unfortunate tendency in this industry to refer to capital intensity as only expenditures on plant and equipment divided by revenues or something like that, and to ignore spectrum. And one of the reasons for that, I suspect, is that in the financial community, they tend to want to look at how the company is deploying capital over time, and spectrum auctions come up only sporadically and require huge investments. Nonetheless, Mr. Entwistle has to worry about earning a return on that spectrum investment. And over time, you have to accumulate that with the plant and equipment investment, because the shareholders don't care whether he's spending their money on spectrum or plant and equipment. He's got to earn a return on both.
If I can add one thing. So while it's true that we are LTE and LTE advanced in most of our network, that investment has not ended. And in fact, you keep adding money to that network. Now, whether it's in the form of capital to add capacity as our subscribers use more and more and more, and certainly we've seen that with the addition of these new data plans. We see a tremendous uptick in usage, but also LTE-A or any network technology is not a step function. It is you're adding further and further capabilities as that technology evolves. So we're not stopping. We have not stopped investing in LTE nor LTE advanced. In fact, we are continuing those investments and having to overlay on top of that a 5G investment. 5G, and I think a lot of people don't really understand this, 5G will take many years to roll out. It is going to come in waves. The first wave will be, of course, the ubiquitous, kind of call it the umbrella coverage network, that with some hope and some desire, there'll be an adequate 3.5 auction that'll come that will be considerate of all operators and not exclude anybody from that auction. That will be the first coverage layer. But successively after that, we will add more to that coverage layer, as well as start building the underlay in microcells. A 5G network will take many years to roll out. It is not a step function, and it's going to be highly, highly capital intensive.
Agreed. Building in the vicinity of 200 and installing in the vicinity of 275 small cells is not going to happen overnight across the country. What factors go into your decision to expand your network to new coverage areas or to improve the quality of your network? I take the point that at the end of the day, the individual shareholder may not care what you're investing in, but I'm guessing the board of directors does. So what factors are at play between those two competing objectives?
Do you want to go and I'll top up?
Yep. Okay, so first thing, we obviously care about reliability. Our company, our brand is based on reliability and therefore service. So as we take a look at how we make investment decisions, we make them in a kind of a laddered sense. At our very lowest rungs, we worry about things like, are we meeting safety concerns for our team members? Are we meeting regulatory obligations? But soon after that, we will add capacity for our existing base, and how do we actually do that? On top of that, then we'll start taking a look at, are there fixes or elements we want to add to our network to even improve quality in areas where we think we need to improve it? beyond that, we go into expanding into other areas and other coverage zones. So it's this ladder that we use to kind of balance our funding, and we start at the bottom. As we climb up that ladder, we actually do, believe it or not, business cases on each one of those layers, and we will actually approve things as those business cases prove out. Unfortunately, the regulatory environment in Canada and mandated roaming has caused us to be a little bit more circumspect on actually expanding the reaches of our network because the payback periods have been elongated. And that is a truism. And so if you kind of look at how we actually build our networks, it's in that ladder, and we will work backwards at trying to get return.
So maybe some other factors that I think are worth reflecting upon. We are influenced by the competitive environment and have a perspective not to want to be ever at a disadvantage in that regard. We are attracted to areas where we think there is penetration gain opportunity, where we have disproportionately low market share, and it represents for us a very attractive model. Thirdly, areas where we can harmonize wireless investment with our fiber deployment program. To the extent to which we can couple wireless deployment with fiber fronthaul delivery of wireless traffic and backhaul redistribution. That particular build and doing it synergistically to get scope economies between wireless and fiber has been a major driving force for us, particularly on the eve of 5G as it relates to our pre-positioning in that regard. Our sectoral focus also is something that drives our network deployment decisions. So as it relates to the oil and gas industry, we are a significant supporter of that industry, and to make sure that we have powerful, potent, high bandwidth, ubiquitous coverage in areas like Fort McMurray has been something that has been front of mind for us. Similarly, we are big pushers on both health and ag tech. One of the areas where we're looking to significantly improve our wireless coverage is within rural Canada farming areas as we pursue our technology and data agenda to support precision agronomy optimization within the ranch environment and farm-to-fork food traceability activities in a data-rich world. And then lastly, and this again is something that I'm loath to let hold of, but given the decisions in front of us right now with mandated MVNOs, this may change prospectively. But historically, we've had a deeply rooted competitive ideology that we want to be best in the world. And so when you look at who has won the J.D. Power network quality, PC Mag speed test, Ookla speed test, Open Signal speed test, Tutela speed test over the last 3 to 5 years, it's been Telus. And we think being best in the world on the network front is another parameter of our customers first ideology. And we are obsessive about that leadership position because we really do think it underpins the Canadian economy, the vibrancy of our private sector, and sets us up to answer the social challenges on health, education, the environment, and economic disparity on a socioeconomic basis. And so for us, that's been a big front of mind driver in terms of leading the way on CapEx per customer, and you can see that in the OECD data. That's something that we're reviewing now, contingent upon how favorable the investment environment is going to be prospectively and how much transparency we have within the regulatory model.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Dupont, I have a couple of questions for you with respect to the study that you did. In the Competition Bureau's intervention from May of last year, they had some concerns with respect to your study in that they didn't believe it properly represented the realities in the Canadian market. Specifically, there was concern that most of the plans, 192 of 246 plans looked at, or 78%, were from low-cost MVNO and flanker brands, prepaid plans, services on 3G. And I'm just wondering if you could outline for us what methodology you used in selecting those plans to look at.
Oh, certainly, I'd be happy to do that. I'm actually quite surprised by the Competition Bureau's response. To me, it looks like a simple, inconvenient study that was dismissed, because the points that the Competition Bureau raised, I've explained to them. I've met with the Competition Bureau. I've given them my database. In short, everything they raised are instructions from ISET. They're not choices by me, whether we use prepaid services or we use flanker brands. Those are instructions by ISET. And so let me explain that ISET, for the last 12+ years, asks consultancies to bid for a contract where Canada is compared to the G7 plus Australia. And in those specifications, it lists what needs to be done. My firm, NERA, has received that RFP, and I think sometimes it's WAL, sometimes it's Nordicity that completes the work for ISET. It's not NERA. But I followed those instructions in my analysis. So the prepaid, the flankers, the criticism raised by the Bureau is just me following the instructions by ISET, because I want to contrast what a proper study does relative to the study that WAL and Nordicity put out.
I just want to add something. My observation from the hearings, there seems to be a line of thought that says the carriers might have low-cost plans on their flankers, but they don't actively promote them. And I just want to give you our perspective on that, because it's just not true. More than half of our activations last year were on Public and Koodo. Public is our fastest growing brand. 50% of our media spend is on Public and Koodo. By the end of 2020, from starting between 2018 and 2020, we will have launched 1,000 physical points of distribution for Public. 40% of all of our stores are multi-branded. We're working towards 100%. We communicate to all of our customers that they're on the same family, and we allow all of our customers to migrate between brands. And last year, nearly 400,000 customers migrated between our brands. We go to market, and we love all of our brands.
And if I may, and just follow up on Mr. Senko's comment, is let's look at this outside the instructions of ISET. Why would we not look at flanker brands? Why would we not look at prepaid? Those are offers that Canadian consumers can choose from. They're important in a review of competition. What they end up choosing is at their discretion. So if, say, 88% of Canadians decide to choose a postpaid plan, that is their decision. But they had the choice to use a prepaid plan. So it is important that we look at all the market offerings. And so in this instance, I agree with ISET that we should look at all of them.
Last point from me, the difference between a prepaid and a postpaid plan are blurred now anyway. Prepaid plans are recurring monthly plans. Most of our customers go on some type of pre-authorized auto pay. And on postpaid, we're seeing a much higher bring your own device out of contract type purchase behavior. So the difference between a bring your own device postpaid recurring monthly plan and a pay-as-you-go recurring monthly plan is minimal.
So still with the study, in the interest of ensuring an apples-to-apples comparison, were the criteria used in selecting your Canadian plans the same as other countries? I just want to make sure that it would be a similar mix of type of plans when you're comparing price points in Canada to other jurisdictions.
Yes, sir. The selection criteria were the same.
Okay, thank you. Given that, I note that the FCC has recently released, well, not recently, 2 years ago, its International Broadband Data Report. And they use the same model as you have, but they come to a very different conclusion with respect to rates in Canada. How can you, if you're familiar with the study, why the contrary conclusions between the two studies?
So a couple of things is, so yes, the FCC does conduct an international ranking exercise. I think it's done so only once. I understand from the FCC that they're going to repeat this in the future. But so the model is not exactly the same. They're both regression models. That's important. But the focus of that study was more to see where the United States lies. And when you look at the number of observations they took for Canada, I don't exactly know, but I know it was very, very few. I want to say it was one per carrier, one plan per carrier, but I might be wrong. But I know it was very few. So with respect to Canada, it's not going to really tell you a whole lot, or other countries, because they used a very thin sample.
Okay, thank you.
And Commissioner, I'm sorry, if I may just add one important point is, in that very same study, the U.S. is not doing very well. Yet the FCC repeatedly, year after year, decides it's an effectively competitive market. That's ought to tell us something about how they view their study and how they view the conclusions. So it might be one of many considerations they have, but what I think is so difficult in this setting here is that a report like Wall and Nordicity that is clearly deeply, deeply flawed makes it to this stage of conversation.
Okay, thank you for that additional information. One final area of cleanup before I move on to the next section. Throughout the course of the proceeding, CRTC staff made multiple attempts to get some data from Telus, specifically, and from other carriers as well, on plans and the number of subscribers, for instance, but Telus seemed to have certain constraints in providing fulsome responses to some of those requests for information. So could you expand on some of the issues or challenges you faced in responding to those RFIs?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner McDonald. Whenever we get requests for information from the Commission, we obviously take them seriously. We have a duty to respond to them in a just and adequate manner, and we take that level of diligence and care whenever we respond to requests for information. In these particular requests, we actually supplied the data requested. The data requested was by CMA, Census Metropolitan Area, and we provided revenues and subscribers by CMA. The problem that we isolated was that our revenues were approximations. We do not track the revenues by Census Metropolitan Area, and so we noted that in our responses.
So I will draw your attention to our Exhibit 4, where we've asked specifically for you to provide complete information with respect to RFI question 101, which was dated November the 15th. Can you confirm if you'll be in a position to provide that information?
I apologize. I don't actually think I have the exhibit. Do we have it? One moment, please.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I see these. These are the undertakings that were issued on the first day of the hearing. Is that
yes,
correct?
exactly. I just want to make sure that you will be in a position to provide a response to that undertaking.
We haven't done a detailed review of these undertakings as of yet, but based on an initial skim, certainly most, if not all, the undertakings we will respond to in the same manner that we always respond to requests for information.
And that includes 101, which I specifically asked about. Yeah. Well, we can come back to it.
We will answer. I don't actually have question 101 directly in front of me. I'm not sure where it is.
We can bring that to your attention after the break. I don't want to belabor the point.
I see. It's request for undertaking 28. We certainly will provide an answer to this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's talk for a few minutes about low-cost and occasional use plans. In the context of this proceeding, the province of BC filed a study that said that the vast majority of Canadians, 86%, do not consider the costs of their wireless services reasonable. Yet in your intervention, you note StatsCan data, the Consumer Price Index, which shows that since between 2016 and 2019, the cost of all items went up by 8%, the cost of food went up by 4.8%, shelter up by 7.2%, transportation up by 15.3%, energy up by 17.6%, and cell service down by 7.7%. So why is this sentiment still persisting on the part of Canadians that prices are not going down and they are indeed paying too much for their services?
Thank you for the question. In the Commission's survey, I think we came to a quite different result about levels of satisfaction, price satisfaction of Canadians. So that's certainly a first data point. The range of options, particularly in the value segment of the market, are multiplying very rapidly. It's our area of greatest commercial vitality and loading. And our suggestion would be that there is not an objective availability problem, not an objective affordability problem, but there may well be an awareness problem in terms of the offers that are in that segment for more price-sensitive Canadians.
Yeah. So, you know, we believe we are already providing affordable plans with Public and Koodo. And I talked about this before. Like, we have talk and text plans starting from $8. We have data plans starting from $15. We have solid 1 gig unlimited talk and text plans for $23 or 77 cents a day. What we're really trying to do is create more awareness and more promotion. So then what are we doing? I mentioned earlier, half of our media spend is going towards Public and Koodo. We are undergoing a process of building 1,000 points of distribution for Public Mobile, where people can get face-to-face support for Public Mobile. We're multi-branding all of our corporate stores. As of right now, we have over 100 corporate stores that are multi-branded. We communicate to our base. So for example, when we get a new customer, or after we upgrade a customer, we give them a welcome call. And in that welcome call, we make them aware that they're in a family of brands. You know, those plans are available to them. And we facilitate a substantial amount of migrations between our brands. And I must say that the net movement is down towards the flanker brands and away from Telus. So we take the awareness issue very seriously, and we believe that we're aggressively addressing it.
Well done. You anticipated about 4 of my questions. If you keep that up, you might just get lunch today. Still on the same topic, in Exhibit 2 that we filed on Tuesday, I know to your comments that there are a number of plans which are $15 and less, an $8+ plan with Telus and a couple from Public, one at 10, one at 15. Are those plans still available in the market? Are they permanent plans or promotional?
They're largely accurate. They're missing one plan from Telus, which is a $10 plan, which we can undertake to provide you. And there's a public plan in here that is now at $15 versus $10. The Telus plan, by the way, is a $10 plan.
Okay, thank you. Would it be a fair statement to say that you would always keep plans may change, but that you always keep a similar number of plans in this range in the market at all times?
That is a fair statement, yes. We're trying to serve this market. And also, another thing that I would say is one of the things that we love about the public market is that, you know, many customers may not pass a credit check, for example, and they can get a great plan and a great experience on public. They build their credit with us. We outreach to them in 6 months, and we allow them options to move to plans on Koodo or Telus if they want. And the other thing that's really interesting is we thought that most of our public customers would move to Koodo, but they actually tend to move to Telus, which surprised us. So you get a lot of movement from public to Telus, from public to Koodo, from Koodo to Telus, and Koodo and Telus down as well. And we facilitate that.
That's very interesting, because yesterday Vice Chair Leisner had a conversation with Bell, and they seem to take an approach that they keep their primary brand much more separate than their flanker brand. And you seem to allow more free flow between the various brands, perhaps even to the point of, okay, you want a low-income plan and the customer's contacting Telus, you'd be better suited on one of the flanker brands.
I think it's a sign of great competition. We are the same approach. We do believe in the family of brands, and that's why we're multi-branding our stores, as an example. You know, we even reorganized our marketing department in Q4 to make our decisions more holistically across the family of brands versus isolating our brands. Now, that's not to say that our brands aren't delivering specifically different value propositions. So our Telus brand is aimed at families. It's aimed at people who want premium devices. It's aimed at people who are connecting a tablet, a watch to a smartphone and using a lot of data. Our public brand tends to be more digital savvy customers looking for affordable rates, and Koodo's in between.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we looked at the number of Canadians, and the majority had said that they wouldn't consider or hadn't considered moving to a flanker brand due to fears with respect to network quality. And many of those individuals were arguably people that would benefit the most from a lower cost plan. So it seems as though you may be going down the road of trying to remove some of that misapprehension with going to the other plans. Like, are your potential customers on Koodo, for example, are they aware that they're riding on the Telus network and will experience similar levels of quality of service?
Yes, and we've been communicating to our base of customers that they are on the world's best network, which is Telus, which it's a great story to tell them because they are on the best network. And secondly, we want them to fully appreciate that, you know, as they mature in their life cycle. So as an example, most of our Koodo customers tend to be single younger adults. As they get married, as they have families, we want them to be fully aware that they're running on the Telus network, and Telus network is aimed at families with family discounts. So we make them aware of that value proposition.
And you had mentioned that you have multi-brand stores now. Do you promote these low-cost plans, regardless of which primary or flanker brand they may be going to? Do you promote them all the same way? Are they available equally on your website without 15 clicks? Are they have information available in your stores and kiosks?
So in a multi-brand store, and we can undertake to show you pictures, but right from the branding of the store, you have Telus and Koodo, or you have Koodo and Public. And within the store, our reps are trained to ask the customer what are their needs and what serves them the best. And we shepherd them to the best value proposition for them. And I think this is one of the reasons why Telus is a leader in customer experience, and one of the reasons why our churn rate is so low. And as Darren points out, it's also in retail as well.
If your customer service reps are trained across the brands and to match people with the best solution for their individual needs, would it be possible for you to file a copy of those training manuals for your sales reps as an undertaking?
We can do an undertaking for the training of our dual brand stores.
Thank you.
Confidentially. Confidentially,
yes, yeah. And the plans that you have in market, you mentioned some of the low-cost plans that you that were in our exhibit have changed slightly. How often do you go back and revisit those plans, and how often do you follow up with individual customers to ensure that those plans are still meeting their needs? I guess for a start, is there an average life to one of these plans before it's reviewed and replaced?
It's hard to give.
It depends.
It's hard to it's hard to give an average, but you know, these are not promotional plans, so they'll be in the market typically for greater than a year. The market's changed, and as you know, as prices are coming down, we'll revise pricing based on market conditions, but they're not plans that we're putting up and pulling down frequently.
And when you're deciding which plans to put into market in the low-income space, do you target any of those plans towards specific Canadians? We think this one will be of great appeal to seniors, for example.
I would explain it this way. One of the things that we're trying to do is simplify the number of plans for both our customers and for our employees. So we're trying not to have 2,000 rate plans. We used to have 2,000 rate plans, and we've worked hard to get that down to 10 to 20. But what we do is we market what we think is the most appropriate rate plan to the most appropriate segment. So, for example, we have rate plans that support new Canadians, and we'll market them. So we have we have special plans that have unlimited talk back to their home country, and those would be very targeted to those new Canadians. We will communicate to a senior, one of our lower entry plans, if we think that that's appropriate for them. But by the way, you can't just bucketize seniors, many seniors, and I think of my 87-year-old mom. She's got a tablet, she watches Netflix on her tablet, and she wants unlimited plans, right? So they're not all the same, right? And part of the reason why we have multi-branded stores is so that we can really understand what the customers are looking for and shepherd them in the right direction.
Well, perhaps your mom can teach my mom how to use her tablet.
My mom is awesome. That's crazy.
I would cut down on the calls to me.
Just one other plan that's worth noting as well. For youth that are aging out of foster care, we have a plan specific to that constituency called Mobility for Good, and that is a plan of a free device free 3 gigs of data, free digital literacy training, and free security. And we did that for reasons of safety, so that they can stay connected with their friend group, because a number of them end up on the streets, and the recognition that if they want to pursue anything from technical vocational education through to applying for a job, it's all done digitally, obviously now within the electronic world, and they have that particular necessity, yet they don't have the means nor the credit checks required to secure it. And that program now is heading towards 5,000 young Canadians that have been the recipient of it.
Okay, thank you for noting that. We've actually asked other parties whether they have similar programs, and so far I believe you're unique in that regard. So thank you for noting that. If we did find that there was a gap in the market such that we needed to mandate low-cost plans for a specific means-tested segment of the population, can you speak on the feasibility of that, and what, if any, challenges that would create operationally for you?
Is your question one of like legal feasibility, can you do it, or operational feasibility?
I was thinking more operational feasibility.
Okay. So.
Billing systems tend to be where most of the problems sometimes occur.
They're more important than the Constitution. Yes, exactly.
So I'm of two minds on how to answer this. So the first way I'm going to answer it is that I'm passionate that I don't believe we need to mandate what already exists. I think we're serving this segment, and we're working hard to create awareness through our investments in marketing and dual branding and communicating to our base. Operationally, if we're mandated to create a rate plan, we can create a rate plan, but I don't think that that's the right answer.
Thank you, and I mean, I take those comments. Would it be easier just to mandate a low-cost plan that any Canadian could avail of if they so chose, removing the need to do the means testing?
My sense is that's probably an overbroad response or disproportionate response to any problem. And the problem might frankly be transparency or awareness, and the better measures in the circumstances are probably transparency measures. Some companies or all companies taking greater steps to give visibility and prominence to their value offers. The Commission as well taking holistic account of the offers that are out there and publishing and educating quarterly. I think we can do it together. The point you raise is important, but the remedy might be transparency more above all.
On the topic of doing it together, is Telus part of ISED's Connected Families initiative?
Yes, it originated with Telus. In fact, it was in the minister's speech at the Telecom Summit to recognize such, but that got struck. But we originated it, and we now have over 40,000 families that are on that particular program. And as it relates to your previous question, we tried in vain to get that launched for 4 years with the previous government, and they wouldn't support it. We needed information from them related to things like child tax benefit credits to act as a proxy for a low-income family, and we couldn't get any interest. And only when we abandoned it and said, let's not then do it with the federal government, let's do it with the provincial government of BC and Alberta, we had it launched within 6 months. The Conservative government at the time, because it was running up to an election cycle, came up to us at the 11th hour and said, you know what, actually, we want to do it with you now. And we said, it's too late. We're going to proceed with the GOA and Go BC, and we're going to bring this to fruition. You had 4 years to do it. Now we're going to make it happen at the provincial level, and we've done exactly that. We architected it, we designed it, and the level of thought that went into it as a collaborative venture was quite interesting. So it's not just subsidized, highly subsidized, low-income, high-speed internet connectivity for $10 as a viable service. We also did provided a subsidized computer. We did digital training within the household to improve the level of literacy so that there could be a value extracted from the bandwidth and the associated subsidized economics. We gave them Telus-wise to make sure that they were protected within that environment, not just at a cybersecurity level, but thinking about the young people within the home at a predator level. And then we teamed up with the Royal Conservatory of Music. So it wasn't just about a STEM conversation that was taking place, but also so that we could bring the arts into that household as well from an educational point of view. That's what we designed and brought to market.
Thank you for that. And given your experience with ISED's program, or your program, however you'd want to phrase it.
I'll phrase it our program.
Okay, our program. Would it make sense, or would the easiest approach be for our program to be extended to include a similar partnership between key stakeholders to offer a low-income wireless plan as well that would augment what you're already doing?
So again, not looking to be intransigent, but I would say, is that a problem that we need to solve for within the wireless pricing construct when we look at the plethora of plans that are available at both the public mobile and Koodo level, at the Lucky and Virgin level, and at the Chatter and Fido level? I think there are very affordable offers that would address the lower quintile income group that would provide the requisite level of affordability, particularly as it relates to a % of disposable income for those households. If you look at the plans that Jim has articulated, those plans would be in the circa 1% of the income of those households for people that are looking for, extremely high discounts or value or the requisite affordability given some of their economic challenges. And so I would say those plans exist today. They exist within Telus. They exist within our competitors. I'm not going to say, no, we won't consider it. We've never been dimensioned as that type of organization. We've always been open to a discussion in terms of, serving the greater good. But I don't think a regulatory solution is required here because the market's already providing the solution that I think, quite rightly that you're looking for from an altruistic point of view.
So then it would be your position that individual Canadians, perhaps more vulnerable Canadians, would best be served by the market delivering a wide array of plans offering different features to meet their unique needs versus one prescribed plan with a fixed number of minutes and a fixed amount of data usage, as prescribed or suggested by some of the consumer groups that have intervened in the proceeding.
That's correct. And I think two comments. One is we're not talking about making Netflix and YouTube more affordable here. We're talking about a requisite mobile communications capability for this particular constituency. And I think we've architected rate plans that do that quite adequately, from 250 megabits to 1 gig, from $15 to $25 to $30, and plans that are cheaper than that. The second thing that we haven't discussed is that a big component of the cost of wireless is beyond the airtime. It's the device. And if you look at what Telus is offering on certified pre-owned, or its Bring It Back programs, we're offering devices that are greater than 50% off the sticker price of those device items. And I think having highly affordable airtime, customized for the type of usages that we're talking about here, and then devices, including certified pre-owned, and bring it back, that make the hardware component affordable for the individual or the family. I think holistically, that's the right model to discuss and to look at.
Thank you. Just one final question, and then it may be time for a break. Would it be possible for you to file as an undertaking the uptake that you've had and the number of subscribers you have for these various plans that are, shall we say, in that $15 or less range, so we get a better picture as to how many people are interested in subscribing to such plans?
Yes, we'd be prepared to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonald. We'll break for 15 minutes. Return at 11:15. Thank you.
I think next, maybe we'll turn just briefly to discuss win-backs. And can you maybe give it a high-level process that you may go through after you receive a port-out request? I understand that obviously you'll port out the number, but from a sales retention standpoint, do you undertake any activities when that request is received?
Thank you for the question. First thing is we do not immediately drive a win-back call when we receive a port request. Full stop. We don't do that. The second thing is we do not target any specific carrier. So we'll do win-backs against our customers. We may choose customers that are of higher value that we would like to have back, but we don't target any specific carrier, and we do win-backs against all carriers. I think the next thing that I would say is that win-backs are an example of a highly competitive market. And, I talked earlier about how promotional the market was, and my team and I will compete fiercely to maintain our customers. And when we lose them, we'll fight fiercely to get them back.
You said that you don't immediately reach out to them. On Tuesday, we heard from Freedom that some of their potentially soon-to-be new customers were actually being called while they were still in the store. Can you identify what the not immediately call would mean? Do you leave it alone for a certain period of time before you would reach out?
Customers have 15 to 30 days to return their device without penalty. And so we target our win-backs in that 15 to 30-day window. We do not, again, call while we're receiving the port and they're in the store.
What would your thoughts be on some type of cooling off period after a client decides to go to another carrier before you would be able to reach out to them with a potentially enticing offer?
My honest thought is it's anti-competitive. Like we're trying to drive more competition in the market, so allow the carriers to compete for customers that are switching. Like that is what competition is, and so my personal opinion is I think that would be anti-competitive.
If I could just top up as well on what Jim said. The Commission agreed with Jim's point as well. It previously examined win-back activities in a 2003 decision. It found that win-backs are characteristic of a competitive market, and such rivalrous behavior is to be expected in such robustly competitive markets such as we're in today. So we don't believe that there's justification for regulation of win-backs.
Thank you for that.
Did Freedom comment on what they do when they lose a high-speed internet customer or a TV customer to tell us in terms of their wireline win-back activity?
This hearing's about wireless.
But at the end of the day, as it relates to their philosophy on win-backs, shouldn't it be reasonably applied to both within a robust, sustainable, competitive construct?
Well, let me ask the question a different way, because they raised the specific example of a customer receiving a call in store. They've already sliced open the iPhone case. Its value's gone down by $250. Would you just take that to be a cost of doing business?
I can't comment on the specific case, but what I can comment on, having worked in the UK, France with the origination of Bouygues Telecom, Australia with Optus, that vibrant win-back activity is a positive characteristic of a robust competitive market. Secondly, if I was going to be making a comment about win-backs, I would be cognizant of not talking out of both sides of my mouth if I'm making a comment on wireless on the other hand, and yet my practices are different as it relates to HSIA or TV losses on the other. I think consistency between the two is appropriate, particularly in a world where increasingly there's wireline and wireless bundling.
Switching over to wireline services, particularly investment, a number of interveners have cited the 2019 policy direction to the CRTC for us to encourage all forms of competition and investment. And they cite that MVNOs do bring competition and investment, specifically investment in core facilities not tied to the RAN. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts on that viewpoint.
I think the short version is that is absolutely wrong. I'll give you a couple of statistics. So MVNOs, they might make very short-term investments, but they have no long-term trajectory viability. I'll give you a couple of examples that I jotted down. So for instance, Disney Mobile, owned by the Walt Disney Corporation, spent $150 million trying to get Disney Mobile off the ground. They failed within less than 1 year. Helio, another MVNO in the United States, spent in excess of $500 million trying to get an MVNO off the ground, and they failed. Mobile ESPN, $150 million, I could go on. But the fact is, there's just simply no credible international data that MVNOs invest and compete. They're niche players. It's an investment model. They're looking for a niche market. And then they, if they find a niche market, they often sell themselves to an MNO, mostly the host operator. But most MVNOs just go out of business because they're not viable.
I had that very discussion yesterday with another intervener, and maybe you have thoughts on it as well. At a very high level, how many MVNOs actually succeed or end up going bankrupt or getting acquired?
I don't have a percentage, but I've been studying MVNOs for over 12 years. I've written extensively on MVNOs. The far majority of MVNOs go out of business. There's not even an accurate track of how many MVNOs there are, and I explained that in my submissions, because they enter so quickly and exit so quickly. It's very unclear. You could look at it one day, you get one count, and you look at it another day. There are very few MVNOs that actually worked. One that's often mentioned is TracFone in the United States. That is owned by Carlos Slim, the owner of Telmex, and it's a very particular niche market targeted to the Hispanic population of the United States. It is also a very interesting business model because it rides on U.S. federal subsidies and then connects to Mr. Slim's network in Mexico. That's one MVNO that works. There might be a few others, Richard Branson had success with Virgin, but Virgin has been mostly sold and is now a flanker brand in most countries. Other than that, there's just not many MVNOs that worked.
Sorry.
Let me jump on this, please, from the European perspective. I mean, there are no numbers we can rely on, but my observations for a long time as a regulator for more than a decade and as a consultant, what I can say is a significant part of the MVNOs are taken over by MNOs, sometimes the host network or others. Some go out of business in the same way as they came in. It's very difficult to even get a solid number, how many are in a certain market, because they come and go, and most of them have very, very low market shares, below 1% or so. Single-digit numbers up to 5%, 6% sometimes. That's the average.
Okay, thank you.
Just one thing on that as well. I would like to go back, and maybe we can have a down-the-line discussion in this regard as to, are there conditions that are dictating a change from the regulatory policy of facilities-based competition and the transparency and continuity that we've enjoyed to support the type of investment cycles that we have within our industry? So is there a justification? Is there a need? Is there a market dysfunctionality? Is there a market failure that requires intervention and a shift away from facilities-based competition and the introduction of MVNOs based on the global experience? Secondly, I think it would be worth at some point discussing the timing of doing that, because a shift away from facilities-based competition and the introduction of an MVNO construct on the eve of 5G, I think could be a decision that would impact negatively the type of progression that Canada would want to enjoy on the 5G front, and would potentially undermine the wireless network leadership that's been achieved at 3G and 4G, both within Canada and on a global basis. So I think those would be fruitful areas perhaps to discuss.
Well, as we know, a large MVNO market has not emerged in Canada. Have you, has Telus, out of curiosity, been approached by any potential MVNOs seeking access?
Yeah, let me take that question. We filed as part of the process, I think it was 301, our answer to this, and we provided all of the agreements. We do have them in place pursuant to the definition that the Commission has established with respect to what an MVNO is.
And perhaps you could outline for me what the process is that a potential MVNO would have to go through when opening negotiations with you. Do you have a blanket agreement that they must sign? Do you have set terms and conditions? Are terms and conditions negotiated? If you've successfully been able to negotiate them, just wonder if you can give me a flavor for those talks.
I think it's extremely important to understand, and much like any commercial negotiation, but this one in particular represents a very broad spectrum, and none of the cases that we've talked about, including the ones that we've concluded, are exactly the same as the others. So to answer your first question with respect to a template, no such thing exists. Each situation is defined by the unique characteristics of the approaching party. So I would start with that. Okay. I would then follow up to say, in any other commercially based negotiations, it starts with a foundation principle that both parties will derive roughly equivalent value. And in situations where some of the participants have suggested they've been unable to secure an agreement with Telus, it's not because we're unwilling to discuss it. We have ongoing conversations. We trade potential proposals back and forth. Ultimately, where a commercial agreement isn't reached, it's because there isn't sufficient value for both parties. And in fact, in a number of cases, the lack of willingness to move closer to consensus in terms of the construct is a result of the approaching parties, sort of won't trade off certain elements that from their business perspective, their business plan, their business assumptions, they feel are involatile, and maintain that those are key elements to contain in a commercial agreement that don't map very well to our priorities.
So in those negotiations, if we proceeded forward and did mandate access but left it to commercial negotiations, would your talks with potential new MVNOs be aided if the CRTC were to develop some standardized set of terms and conditions? Understanding that you could always negotiate, both parties could negotiate better terms if they so chose, as a starting point for the talks?
In general, I find that where there is no need to mandate commercial constructs that generally don't facilitate positive outcomes. Witness the fact that we have several existing agreements that are beneficial to both parties sort of belays the fact that they're necessary, would be my considered opinion.
If I may just add to that, just 2 points. We started out this discussion by saying there's not enough MVNOs in Canada. I do just want to say that according to telegeography, the count of independent MVNOs in Canada is 13. The average in the OECD is 15. The median is 10. So there's a heavy outlier, which is Germany. The number of operator-owned MVNOs is 7. The OECD average is 3.7. The median is 2. Now, just wanted to say, when we're saying there's not enough, that's a bit unclear to me. But the second point with respect to is regulation going to improve the negotiations? There are some natural experiments we can look at. There are 3 countries that have regulated aspects of this MVNO-MNO relationship. If I recall correctly, that's Chile, Czech Republic, and Japan. And we've looked at the outcome, whether that results into more MVNOs, and the answer there is very clearly no. Those are ineffective. So we conclude from those natural experiments that regulation does not improve the negotiations between the 2 parties.
What are your thoughts? Would those negotiations be aided if there was a backstop with the Commission in the event that a negotiated arrangement couldn't be worked out between the 2 parties? I'm thinking specifically about our final offer arbitration, mediated negotiations.
I can just tell you, I mean, the short answer is I don't think it will change anything. I have advised the Ministry of Communication in Israel about their MVNO policy, and Israel went with an arbitration fallback, and this is now close to 10 years ago. I recently sent an email to the ministry and asked how many times they had to intervene, and the answer was 0.
If we did decide to proceed with mandated MVNO access, given your network sharing arrangements with Bell, if we were to mandate Telus to provide MVNO access, would that automatically include Bell's network, or would we have to also mandate Bell? And I guess I could ask the same question for SaskTel, because I believe you have a network sharing arrangement with them as well.
You would have to mandate both depending upon the desired geo coverage of the MVNO that you were looking to facilitate.
And I fully understand that you don't agree with such a mandate, but if we were to mandate, would that should that just be limited to the 3 national carriers, or should it also apply to regional providers as well?
You're quite correct in your assertion that I deeply disagree.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I assume
I
that
think
was correct on that
we should plumb the depths of that quite soon. My disagreement is only matched by how unacceptable that I would find an asymmetric MVNO application where the responsibility was uniquely shouldered by Telus, Bell, and Rogers.
I mean, I'd like to chime in as well. I mean, we talked a little bit about how good networks are constructed and how good quality networks are constructed. And one of the biggest inputs for a quality network is, of course, spectrum. I find it laughable that a new entrant who may have soon 2/3 of the available spectrum that we have and 1/7 of the customers is not considered to be an MVNO host. They have all the capacity in the world. They have all the unused capacity in the world. They have a national asset that's laying there fallow. That's who should be hosting MVNOs, if anybody is to host MVNOs.
That's a fantastic segue, because I want to talk about capacity next. And from my own education, when you're building out your network, how do you ensure that you have adequate capacity for your short, medium, long-term planning?
So I would start short term. We try to employ a just-in-time delivery model to our capacity. We don't try to build capacity out that's years forward, but something that's meant to hit our busiest time of the network kind of 3 months ahead of time. And that's the model we use. You know, when we get into mid or long term, those tend to be based on capabilities of the network. They don't tend to be on capacity. They tend to be us evolving from 3G to 4G, 4G to 4G, LTE advanced, and ultimately to 5G.
Mentioned the trade-offs between network and spectrum utilization.
Sorry, your mic's not on.
If we have scarce spectrum and requirement on the network build front.
Yeah, so Darren's just highlighting that, you know, the teeter-totter, of course, on spectrum. So if we take a look at our networks, in the busiest parts of our network, we are using almost all of our spectrum. It is fully encumbered and fully in use. And of course, the issue there is that if you do not get more spectrum, you are forced to spend lots of capital dollars cell-splitting to actually add capacity. The preferred method, of course, is to add spectrum. Canada is in a unique position globally with how spectrum is allocated. This penchant for saving spectrum for new entrants, which of course creates the situation that I mentioned earlier, is actually laying lots of spectrum fallow, not being able to be used, and it is causing the incumbents to actually spend more dollars adding capacity through network infill, which is not, I think, a desired outcome.
If you are adding capacity and spectrum to your network to improve service quality, whatever the drivers are, would it be possible to leverage that same capacity to support the clients of an MVNO that you have a partnership with?
So we design our networks for the busiest part of the day. Interestingly enough, we've seen, since we've introduced the peace of mind plans, we've seen capacity on our networks dramatically rise, and a little bit of flattening in terms of the usage hours. So I would say that we are kind of at a peakish in our networks between 5 p.m. and 2 a.m. Not entirely flat, but almost flat. That leads me to say that there is no excess capacity in the networks. There is capacity that is to serve our customers, and if we were to host someone else, we would be forced to build extra capacity. I would overlay on top of that the first comment I made, which is there's been a fairly dramatic increase in usage per sub. That is also driving further investment in those networks.
If you do have excess capacity in your network for whatever reason, does it tend to be in more rural areas where there would be fewer users on the network?
No, I would say we don't have excess capacity because we operate a just-in-time model. So, any excess capacity is measured in under 3 months. When we take a look at what's in our rural areas, those are, because of the introduction of wireless HSIA, those are actually busier networks. They're highly more encumbered.
Again, fully understanding your position on MVNOs.
Just on your question, how would you, in an environment where Canada lags the U.S. by 3.5 to 4 years on spectrum availability, which means it has to be quickly recycled into use, per Eros's comments. But how would you participate in a combinatorial clock auction with blind bidding to determine your spectrum requirements if you had to engineer not just for your needs, but hypothetically the unknown needs of an MVNO?
Thank you for that perspective. For my own education, one of the concerns raised with respect to MVNOs is that it would create, they would take customers from the underlying network carrier, and in varying degrees, perhaps the regional carriers. But in your first intervention at paragraph 43, you said that MVNOs have no measurable impact on churn. Is that still your viewpoint?
So I think, again, we can look to the international experience to understand that. MVNOs most definitely do not have an impact long-term competitively. They can do great damage in the short run for very practical reason that Mr. Entwistle just explained. So they create an artificial cost competitive advantage, and they go in and underprice the market, and then they drop out later. So they can create massive destruction, and for those reasons, we know that in the short run they're bad, in the long run they're ineffective.
Given the fact that you plan your network in real time to meet your needs and the challenges you just outlined with respect to anticipating the needs of potential MVNOs, would it be possible for you to file with us in confidence any network or capacity concerns, technical limitations that you feel that you have within your network that would not enable you to support additional MVNOs?
We will absolutely file that.
Thank you.
Can we also in that filing include security and cybersecurity considerations related to that as well?
Okay, thank you. I guess just quickly on our essentiality test for mandating access. We've seen arguments that the RAN is not essential because it's been duplicated by regional carriers. But given the challenges of building in Canada, is it likely that any addition, I'm asking you to look in the crystal ball, is it likely that there will be further duplication out there, new regional carriers or potential new national carrier trying to come to market?
So it's a bit of a two-sided story. I mean, the one side is nobody really knows. You would have to ask the regional providers. But one thing which I think should be front and center to the Commission's consideration is the repeated claims by various parties, including the Competition Bureau, that there's this huge fat profit margin that somehow the nationwide providers earn. Well, I mean, it seems if you were to believe Dr. Chipty, which hopefully you don't, but if you were to believe Dr. Chipty, she proposes to this Commission that if regional providers reached a market share of 20% or more, prices could drop by 65%. So I'll ask you, or why did Freedom not expand? Why did they not build those facilities? So if you were to believe that the market is uncompetitive, then you have to necessarily believe that they are expanding. Freedom has spectrum in all provinces but 2, but despite the claim of an uncompetitive market, has been unable to expand, which I as an economist can only read that the market is really competitive and they don't have a business case to expand. So on one hand is, I think the reality is nobody knows, but if you were to believe the wrong world that's being presented to you, then you would say, of course they're just expanding because they're seeing all these opportunities.
I would like to chime in here with the European perspective and experience. Commissioner MacDonald, we went through all this in Europe. I mean, they have so many attempts to push artificially new operators in a specific market. And of course, the European market is fragmented with 200 or so operators. But that has been done, and we ended up with merger cases, which were very, very difficult cases. And there was no consistent merger policy over time. So that made the whole thing more complicated. We see that when we go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And I can only warn you to make such things. Don't recycle failed European policies.
Again, if we did decide to mandate MVNO access, I'd like to give you the opportunity to comment on what you feel would be the best MVNO model to implement, or perhaps what would be the least harmful to the existing operators of the various types of MVNOs that could be implemented.
So you have to bear with me on my argument that I don't believe that there is the justification to move away from facilities-based competition in this country and forcibly introduce MVNOs in any of the formats that have been discussed. I do not believe that we have a quality issue. We have quality leadership, and this is one of the toughest landscapes on the planet to deploy infrastructure and technology. I believe that's validated by voluminous third-party reports. I think we need to modernize our wireless pricing models so that there is a better quantitative understanding as to affordability and where Canada ranks today in that regard. I think a better understanding on both affordability and quality would mitigate the necessity for government intervention and a shift away from facilities-based competition, for sure. If you would like to understand what model I would propose, I would go back to what I said to Red Wilson at the time with the Telecom Policy Review Panel. Canada should liberalize foreign ownership restrictions. Let free market forces determine the competitive outcomes at the end of the day. That would be what I would postulate. A hybrid MVNO model or an asymmetric MVNO model, to go with the asymmetric spectrum set-asides, is not just economically wrong, it's just not wrong for the industry. I would argue that it's morally wrong. At the end of the day, Commissioner MacDonald, Telus didn't start off as a national player. Telus started off as a pretty weak regional player with an antiquated wireless analog network in Western Canada. Not very many companies have come out of the West successfully to build the national business under a national brand with national employment topologies right across this country, and do it to the point where, you know, we lead the world when it comes to network performance and best-in-class customer service. We're not just best in Canada, we're best on a global basis. And we seem to have forgotten the Telus as the new entrant. I haven't, because our $40 stock price fell to $6. and our debt, as we were undertaking those expansionary activities, was trading at 42 cents on the dollar, as we were using our balance sheet to expand nationally to be a competitive wireless player to the Rogers and to the Bell organizations. There was no MVNO opportunity or service provider model available to us at that juncture. We did it off of our own bat. And some of the conversations right now, particularly on the hybrid front, I would say these are deeply capitalized organizations that have more than sufficient resources to pursue wireless opportunities, leveraging the deployment of infrastructure and technology, and they are owned by Canada's version of Carlos Slim, by some of the wealthiest individuals within the Canadian construct. And so why not let it play out, particularly when you have the trajectory evidence as it relates to wireless affordability that's so encouraging.
So if I may, just again on the international side, so just to answer your question, there are many different shapes and forms of MVNOs. It's very hard to even categorize them. There's also different approaches how regulators such as yours have approached them. Like I said in my opening remarks, 33, well, it's actually 24 of the OECD countries, the regulators have said no regulation at all. 3 of them embedded the regulation in licenses. So if you acquire a license, then the license terms and conditions require that you also host MVNOs. Now, I'll highlight that that applies to everybody that takes a license, whether that's a national provider or regional provider. Then I mentioned there's 3 other OECD countries where MVNOs were part of mergers, and then another 3, which I mentioned earlier, they have some form of regulation. So we have a really wide array of MVNOs, MVNO approaches. Yet the outcome has always been the same. Minimal market share, not competitors. I urge you to read the decision from last week, Judge Marrero in in New York versus Deutsche Telekom, challenging the T-Mobile Sprint merger. There's an entire section on MVNOs, and Judge Marrero clearly concludes that MVNOs are not competitors. In fact, they go even further and say you shouldn't even count their subscribers as independent market share. You should count them as part of the host. So I think it'd be wrong if anybody were to tell you that there is a working MVNO model. We know many, many different people, parties, regulators have tried it. It does not work, so there's no form. I'll have one more addition, which is, I know you're looking at 3 proposals, one by the Bureau, one by Cogeco, and one by CNOC. A, they're not working, and I've written extensively on them. But also, they're not MVNO models. They're actually mandated structure sharing, network sharing. That is unprecedented in the entire world.
I have one question and another offer. The offer is perhaps you may want to take this offline. I think the Commission fully appreciates the arguments you're putting forward as to why we may not want to do MVNOs, but we may still go in that direction. So if you so choose, and you want to put thought around what that potential model could look like in Telus's mind, we would welcome receiving that undertaking. The question is, you mentioned in your opening remarks, and you mentioned in your response just now, I believe the exact quote was liberalization of foreign ownership. And I'm just wondering if you could outline for me exactly what you mean by that.
I mean full opening of our market, applied in a homogeneous fashion to all players within the market, and the elimination of foreign ownership caps in that regard.
So just for clarity purposes, you weren't suggesting that the option of a large multinational tech firm, Amazon, Google, coming into the Canadian market and availing of broad MVNO access would be a good thing.
That's correct. No, that's not what I was representing. What I was representing is that we have foreign ownership restrictions today in place. You can determine whether that should be split in a dichotomous fashion between telecoms and broadcasting, but as it relates to telecoms, applied in a homogeneous fashion across our entire geography and all carriers, that we would eliminate the ownership caps by foreigners and allow full foreign entry. And any foreigner that came into the marketplace, they could acquire a company if they wanted to, or they could build according to a regulatory model of facilities-based competition. If you think that there's a market dysfunctionality, if there's a market failure here, or if there's market opportunity that's not being seized upon and being exacted for the greater good, then open up our borders, as is the case in many of our G7 peers, and let large companies come in, either organically or acquisitively. Telus believes that our best protection against a takeover is a fully valued stock price, and we will continue to execute in that regard.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I'm trying to think of a way I can ask this question. Again, understanding your view on mandated access, so perhaps we can look at this in the context of the MVNO agreements that you have been able to negotiate. Can you give me a flavor of what type of limitations make sense in some of those arrangements? Specifically, I'm thinking, do your MVNO partners, do you allow them to resell their service to other MVNOs? Do those agreements extend to machine-to-machine or IoT solutions?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Let me start with the first piece. The construct of the commercial agreements are designed to be accretive to both organizations and are, generally struck based on what the approaching company has asked us for. So on your IoT question, no, we don't have any that actually involve IoT specifically. So I can talk to that one firstly. The second one, the stacking of or the enablement of MVNEs, you can call it either. We don't believe in that. We don't believe the business model is beneficial for either party. So we don't enable anybody to resell, if you will. So those are the first two questions that you've asked. Was there, I'm sorry if I missed one other one.
I guess just jumping back to that last one, you don't agree with the business model that resellers should be allowed to resell. What is the rationale for that? Is that because you wouldn't have visibility into who the end user is? Does it create technical problems in some way? Does it cause problems from capacity planning point of view?
Well, I'd say in general, and I've been in wholesale at Telus for over 15 years, and both buying and selling on behalf of the organization. It's an impractical business model. And while it might appear briefly to have some traction in general, it doesn't have sustainability or survivability. So what you end up doing is you end up potentially creating a business model that can't be long-term beneficial to either parties, and our experiences suggest that they're not valuable to either participant, so we do not enable those.
Can I add in?
Yes, of course.
So I think you hit an important point. The complexity that's generated from having a seller of a seller of a seller leads to poor planning, because it's very difficult then to actually being able to get that just-in-time delivery of network capacity. Secondly, the one thing that's often not discussed, and it may be too complex to discuss here, but there's a very strong cyber security component to everything that's conducted. So you mentioned IoT. There's an issue, a brewing issue, where devices that are IoT enabled may come from foreign lands. there's a root of trust issue, which is where is that device end-to-end encryption actually rooted? Is it rooted in a foreign nation back to that device, or is it rooted through an MNO? It fundamentally has to be rooted through an MNO. So when we start stacking these capabilities without understanding the technical requirements, especially around things like cyber, we create big problems for our country and our nation.
Thank you for that.
And we'll give you, per my previous comments on the cybersecurity front and MVNOs, we'll give you evidentiary documentation to that effect as well.
Perfect. That will be appreciated. I'm trying to tread lightly because I know I'm going into the area of your existing arrangements. So if you prefer to file a confidential undertaking, that's fine. But with your existing MVNO partnerships, do those MVNOs get access to your domestic and international roaming agreements as part of the contract?
Yes, they do. They have full access to roam. Their subscribers can avail themselves of international roaming as part of the agreements we have with them.
Okay, thank you. Again, understanding your position, but switching towards if the Commission did decide to mandate MVNO access, but did not choose to leave those agreements to negotiation, would you care to comment on the approach that should be taken to rate setting for both, well, specifically the interim rate? Would it be appropriate to use the existing roaming tariffs as an interim rate for MVNOs?
We don't think it's appropriate to use the interim, to use an interim rate that's equivalent to the roaming rate. The roaming rate was designed based on a cost study to provide roaming services, and so the MVNO relationship would not embody the same type of relationship as a roamer on our network, and therefore the rates would not necessarily be the same.
So just so I understand, not the roaming rate or not an interim rate at all?
Not the roaming rate.
Not the roaming rate.
You would necessarily need to resurrect phase 2 costing models and the associated hearings to develop a more accurate scientific and quantitative view, amplifying the regulatory burden and intervention on the industry. As someone who spent a great deal of time both here in the UK on those files, I think that would be deeply counterproductive and unnecessary for the wireless industry. And it concerns me greatly that there is a widening gap between Canada and our nearest neighbor as it relates to regulation, or decreasing regulation and decreasing government intervention in the U.S., and increasing regulation and increasing government intervention in Canada. And I do not think that that widening dichotomy will serve the interests of our country or our citizens well. And I think it's particularly counterproductive on the eve of our 5G deployment, because Canada has a disproportionate need, given its challenging demographics, to leverage technology to bridge time and distance for the productivity of our society.
Given your comments on the phase 2 costing, would it be more appropriate to set a retail minus rate?
So I guess I'll wind it back and say on that one, I disagree wholeheartedly with this particular approach. I have trouble saying, even hypothetically, best to leave it to commercial negotiations, because that would assumptively relay to you that I was supportive of an MVNO model. I'm not supportive of any of the above. But I just highlight that when you start pulling on that piece of string, you find yourself in a laborious regulatory process, and I do not think that that's the right outcome for Canadians.
Okay.
Even under price minus X.
Okay, thank you. We have and will talk about seamless roaming in a minute. But from a technical standpoint, if someone negotiates an MVNO relationship with Telus, do they automatically get seamless roaming?
So as a result of the nature of our network, and in fact, Telus doesn't really roam anywhere, so there isn't an issue for a Telus subscriber with respect to domestic roaming. In an international construct, there really is no such thing as seamless handoff because your network isn't present in a foreign country.
Okay, thank you for that. Based on the current definition of roaming in your tariffs, would they apply to 5G? And if not, what changes would need to be made?
So I think, so the first thing we need to talk about is 5G is not yet here. So it's kind of fascinating to me that we would be talking about effectively what an MVNO, which is a 2G construct, and trying to apply it to 5G. I find that just striking, that investments have not been made in this technology yet, and yet we're already talking about reselling it. So that's the first comment I would make. Second comment is it can't pertain, because the costs of 5G are fundamentally different than the costs of 4G and 3G. In fact, if you take a look at any of the studies that have been done, or our own work that we've been done as we were handling through RFPs, we're discovering that this network will cost on a capital basis, on a per cell site basis, twice as much as a 4G network. And in fact, one of the big things that came out of the GSMA is a big outlier on 5G will be the cost of power. They are power-hungry networks. So it's very difficult to actually say, should it be the same as your precedent network when it's very much different and, in fact, nascent?
So I'm taking from that due to the characteristics of 5G, that the rate would need to change for domestic roaming, in your opinion. Is that correct?
So not only would the rate have to be changed, but we'd also have to talk about the service. 5G is going to open up new services. The interesting thing is the conversation to date has been around what I perceive to be consumer 5G, but 5G will actually introduce other capabilities that are more business oriented. In fact, one of the things that I would say is we tend to hover around talking about wireless technology or telecoms as a vertical. The reality is it's actually a horizontal to our entire economy. And those other verticals that sit on top of it will have all their own business cases and business uses for 5G. So to come up with a common number for 5G service is kind of foolhardy because there's lots of different services that can come with it. And only time will allow those to kind of mature and come out.
Okay, I think that answers what was going to be my next question as well.
We also ask, in terms of your deliberations on this, if you could review what would be the MVNO benefit to 5G progression in Canada, what would be the MVNO benefit to bridging geographic digital divides between urban and rural as it relates to the MVNO benefit. What would be the benefit to investment in this country or sustainable economics, and what would be the MVNO benefit to quality of service? I think those questions or those test points when considering MVNOs, and is it something that is a amplifier or a detriment to 5G, to urban to rural progression, to certain sectoral needs, to sustainable economics or quality of service, would be very important prerequisites in the deliberation process on whether to do or not to do MVNOs.
Well, and one of the benefits of a proceeding as large as this is we have a very large record on which to analyze and make our decisions. I believe that you said in one of your submissions that you don't offer seamless roaming. Is that correct?
That's correct. We do not.
Have any regional carriers reached out to you to try to negotiate seamless roaming?
I would not say they were trying to negotiate anything. What they were doing is saying they believe they have a right to it. We talked to the decisions that have been made by this commission, and that's where the conversation ends. They've proven unwilling to have an actual commercial conversation about it.
I guess maybe can you expand on that? Do they, I don't mean to be flippant, but do they come and say, I want it and I deserve it and I have a right to it? Or do they actually try and engage in a more fulsome conversation?
No, to be quite frank, I want it. I want it for free. There should be. They believe profoundly that it's, and even in the filings, you've noticed that they believe there's an asymmetry in the cost, and I want to dispel that. When somebody says, 15% more of the cost is going to be borne by them, they are the only beneficiary of it. So frankly, when there's a very small delta between the cost, whether it's one-time or ongoing operational, and yet 100% of the value accrues to them, and they don't believe they should pay any incremental fee attached to that service, the commercial discussion breaks down, as you can imagine, rather quickly. Essentially, they want it for free.
Sorry, go ahead.
Maybe I should be allowed to top up, if it's okay, Commissioner. I want to talk about the technical areas of why this is difficult.
Perfect, because that was my next question.
Anticipating your next question. So first thing I would say is, Mr. Rodin yesterday did a fairly adequate job of talking about the complexities of what would have to take place in order for us to design this. So of course he went through the concept of borders. There's the borders between their network and our network, and those networks, those borders change over time. So it's an ongoing management issue of doing that. And if they are growing their networks, they would have to actually do that. Secondly, Mr. Rodin talked about billing. That's something that I think you've already raised in an earlier part of the questions. We recognize how difficult the billing systems are in these big companies, and you actually have to account for the traffic moving across that border. That's an issue. We are going to have to experience interband handoff. That is, one, radio or one channel that we're going to have to move across. That is complex and is difficult for even us in our own network to do. In order to interconnect these networks, we're going to have to use, different vendors, different core networks have their own standards for connecting, and we'll have to actually try to work with the individual vendors to get inter-vendor specific standards to work. So there's a lot of difficulty. I would say as the networks evolve, we certainly know with 5G as an example, we will be adding more and more cores to the network. That's an evolution of the network and required in order to get low latency. If you start to imagine those cores growing, you're going to start getting a permutation and combination problem, as you have to handle all those handoffs across all those cores into that vendor. It is not a cheap and inexpensive or non-complex undertaking. And lastly, I would offer a piece of advice to my new entrant friends. I was a new entrant. I was fortunate enough in my career to be at ClearNet as a new entrant, and we suffered these exact same problems. Now, we didn't run to the regulator to fix them for us. We actually solved our own problems. And so what our $100 solution was, is that we built another cell site at the edge of the network and accepted no new traffic in it. In other words, we allowed it to carry the traffic that moved from the network and through that cell site. Knowing how long durations of calls are, that covered 99% of our drop calls at the edge of the border. We solved our own problem. That is in the right of those new entrants to do for themselves. And if they don't know how to do it, I'm happy to teach them how to do it.
Let's start with teaching me how to do it. I take your point about the challenges of having seamless roaming, especially given so many borders and borders between different providers and making sure that the handoff happens properly. And I'm sure it is complex. Would certain elements of that upgrade in functionality, would any of the equipment that would need to be deployed be able to be leveraged for multiple regional carriers seeking seamless roaming? I guess to ask the question a different way, if you fix it once, do you fix it for everyone?
The quick answer is no, because you're asking a technical question, but as, of course, we know in technology, there's technology, and then there's process, and there's people. And oftentimes, the procedural elements greatly outweigh the technological elements. And each one of those new entrants, each one of those new operators would actually create new processes, new things would have to be undertaken that are unique to the interconnection. So no, fixing one does not fix all.
Just one final request on this one. This was described earlier this week as a 30-year problem with a $100 fix. You suggested it's not a $100 fix. Could you perhaps undertake to provide to us your best estimate of what the cost of the fix would be?
And who do we charge that engineering effort to?
I think, I guess what you could provide to inform us at a high level would be appreciated. Would not be a specific figure that we would hold you to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The answer is yes.
Thank you. You have network sharing arrangements in place. Have you been approached by any of the regional carriers with respect to entering into a network sharing or spectrum sharing arrangement?
No, we have not.
Assuming such conversations were left to commercial negotiations, would you see any problem with structuring such arrangements?
I think Mr. DeGoyu spoke to this issue yesterday, and we prefer to categorize this under its actual name as a network reciprocity agreement. And were there situations where the value that Telus could extract from any sort of network arrangement were mutually beneficial, we would entertain that conversation.
Okay, thank you. There's been a bit of discussion around 5G, specifically around a multi-stakeholder group, to try and address some of the complexity with respect to the pending rollout of 5G. You indicated in your November the 22nd further comments that you don't believe such a group would be effective. I'm wondering if you can expand on why you think that.
Sure, thank you for the question. We believe that a working group is not necessary or beneficial. We don't need another working group. We have good relationships with municipalities and other structure owners. We've negotiated many agreements with them. Given a working group having a broad stakeholder participation, I think that would drive a lot of issues and not being able to reach consensus. In addition, there's the issue of confidential and sensitive, commercially sensitive information. All to say that this would result in delays in construction. So if there were disputes, we believe that the Commission would be empowered to deal with the disputes under the current legislation.
You explained in one of your RFI responses that the CRTC working group for municipal access agreements was not successful. Did you take away from that process any lessons learned that could perhaps inform future working groups, including the potential for a future 5G working group?
The lesson that we took, in particular my team took from the working group for municipal access agreements, was that municipalities are all very unique, and to lump them all together into a working group and throw a pardon me, blanket agreement at them doesn't work. In fact, we like to negotiate with municipalities and arrive at commercially mutual terms and conditions.
Okay, thank you. One final question on 5G and working together. I would just like to get your thoughts on the possibility of the various service providers across the country being mandated to implement one 5G network as opposed to several. I note that countries like South Korea and Germany have taken a similar approach, and they're further ahead on the 5G path than our country is.
So we would fundamentally disagree with it, and it's frankly not necessary. It's a better place to be encouraging more carriers, more options, more investment, more dynamic competition in the marketplace. And I think the larger sort of set of tools that the government can use in terms of, if you look at emerging best practices among 5G leaders, is get as much spectrum out there as quickly as you can on a cost-efficient basis, support rapid access to passive infrastructure because of the density of deployment that's going to be required, small cells, et cetera. And finally, have a stable, predictable, investment-friendly environment. And then the private sector will do the rest. And that'll be better for Canada.
Can I chime in on this? Because
yes.
You mentioned Germany. In Germany, there is an idea which has been raised how to cover the blind spots in the existing 4G networks. And so the idea came up to build for those areas which are non-economic a kind of public or one wholesale network could serve those areas. This has nothing to do with 5G rollout. 5G rollout is completely in the private domain. However, for this network idea, it's only a concept. The political pressings are not yet done.
Okay, thank you for that context. Oh, yes, sorry, go ahead.
I'll also note, given you raised South Korea, the speeds that I quoted earlier in terms of Telus at 75 megabits per second, that's the speed of our 4G network compared to the 59 megabits per second 5G network in South Korea, with that geo difference of being 1/100th the size of our country. And I would just put that forward along with the fact that it's hard to roll out 5G aggressively when you're waiting on spectrum auctions to take place, even spectrum auction rules to come to fruition. We need to participate in the 3.5 5G ecosystem, as well as leveraging millimeter wave 5G, so we can use it as an alternative access technology to complement what we're doing on the fiber front. And we're still waiting on those auctions to come to fruition.
I'll leave that to individuals on the other side of the river.
It's just important that you understand the dichotomy. We can't deploy until we get the spectrum.
And I appreciate that point.
Great.
My
Great.
final
Thank you.
area of questions before I turn you back over to my colleagues relate to support structures. And some parties have expressed concerns about significant delays in gaining access to ILEC support structures, especially Videotron, who claimed that multiple rounds of applications basically equate to evidence that the ILECs are gaming the system.
We do it in the room where you
Sorry to interrupt. Can we just pause for a second and clean up that crosstalk? It's very distracting. Okay. I think you can go ahead. Pardon me.
Am I okay now? Yes. I want to give you the opportunity to comment on that, because we have heard from Videotron and other providers about excessive delays in gaining access.
Thank you for the question. I guess at the outset, what I'd like to say is that access is not difficult. In fact, there's a regulatory regime in place already. That's our support structure tariff. It's a CRTC approved tariff. We are compliant in meeting our tariff obligations, all the terms and conditions that are outlined in the tariff. Importantly, we fulfill a vast majority of the applications that we receive. We assess each of the support structure applications, and we don't reject them as a means to deny access for our competitors. And conversely, other carriers' support structures are not regulated, in fact, and there's no reciprocal tariff or obligations. Excuse me.
Is it, I guess, for a starting point, can you give me an idea of what information you would convey in the event of a denial?
Denials are categorized into no capacity, structural issues, or reservations. And reservations are extremely small, as was indicated by, I believe it was Bell yesterday as well.
And by reservations, you mean reserving spare space?
Reserving spare capacity for current and future service requirements.
Okay, thank you. How long is the time frame that you would typically reserve that capacity? I understand why you would need to reserve, but would assume you don't reserve indefinitely.
So again, I'm fascinated by that question. I'm just a dumb engineer. And when I take a look at the government being delayed in spectrum auctions against the US from 2 years for PCS, 2 years for AWS, 6 years for 700, BRS another 6 years, and you're asking me how long do I delay? So I'm saying if it's good enough for the government to delay for average of 3.5 years, that would be the delay that I should be able to delay.
But that is the question.
So let's say 3.5 years.
3.5 years is a reasonable time frame for the...
That's the time frame that the government uses with us.
Okay. When you are going through the process of either approving or denying a request, what type of information flows back and forth from you to the requesting party? Specifically, I'm wondering, do you provide updates if there is a delay for whatever reason, additional engineering work or inspection needs to take place? Do you keep the requesting party in the loop throughout the process if it follows, you know, a non-standard 90-day approval?
We certainly do. There is regular communication, and in fact, it's not unusual to participate in quarterly meetings with our licensees.
And in those meetings, if for whatever reason you do need to deny the request, do you offer other options or solutions? We can't do this, but we could accommodate your request in another manner?
If there are other opportunities, we certainly would provide those other options.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Barron?
Thank you, and thank you for the responses to the questions. I have just a couple of additional ones. I understand your position in support of facilities-based competition. You also described, I believe it was Mr. Dupont, that the MVNO proposals that are currently before us, you described them as structured network sharing. And I note that Telus benefited from a network sharing agreement when it was the new entrant. So why, in your view, would it not be right to allow new entrants to also benefit from this type of network sharing agreement in the form of MVNO access, if in fact the goal is to get to facilities-based competition?
Well, I just want to make a couple of things clear. Thank you for the question. Firstly, it wasn't mandated. You know, two parties came together looking at the situation and decided it was in both of our interests to create a reciprocity arrangement that would enable us to increase competition. And I think it's important to roll the clock back to 2008. There was only one GSM network provider in the country. They had a monopoly on inbound roaming. And in fact, when the new entrants launched their GSM service as a function of the public policy decision, they were the only people that could provide roaming services to those new entrants. The network arrangement that Telus and Bell created was foundation for GSM competition in this country. But it wasn't mandated. It was commercially negotiated based on terms that accrued value to the country, to our citizens, and yes, to both Telus and Bell.
So let me top up. I was actually one of the parties that negotiated that deal, so I'm intimately familiar with that arrangement, that agreement, and what happened. Cal is right. It's a very pro-competitive agreement, and we deliberately set out to create competition in Canada, which I believe to this day is what's driving Canada's networks to be so good in the world, because we're actually so hyper-competitive on the network side. I would say that at the time, this was a problem that needed to be solved in a free market. And as a free market, we approached a number of people trying to negotiate a network arrangement with them, and settled in with a party where we both had common interests and common inputs. And one of the reasons this agreement works is exactly because of that. We come with common interests, common inputs, we supply our spectrum to serve our own customers, and we commit to spending similar dollars and having similar network performance. If those attributes were to hold true in any other agreement in a free market economy, we would absolutely consider it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Entwistle, you used the terms oligopoly and duopoly to refer to the situation with Telus' equipment suppliers and the wireless device providers. And you also alluded to the negative impact that the equipment supplier oligopoly had on increasing your operating costs. You could argue, if you look further down the value chain to the consumer, and we're in the Canadian wireless supplier market, that the fact that there are three big players that, through their main brands and their flanker brands, are cycling consumers through, but where each of these players have about 30% of the market, if you take it from a subscriber perspective or a revenue perspective, then given how you characterized your equipment supplier market, would you not say that the Canadian market for wireless services has that same characterization as an oligopoly? And if not, why not?
So firstly, we make decisions related to pricing based on customer requirements, competitive scenarios, underlying cost considerations, and penetration goals as it relates to our strategy. Within our supply chain, we are entirely price takers. And in addition to that, we are volume takers. We are dictated in terms of how we can market our service, and we are limited in terms of influencing technology development and product development. In fact, we would be ecosystem speculators in making bets as to what we think is going to be the evolving technology ecosystem on a global basis, because we have to surf those economies of scale because we don't have the size required to have that level of influence within our supply chain, given the small size of Canadian operators within the global telecommunications ecosystem. You can call us three large players, but I can tell you in a global context, we are extremely small relative to our peer group. When you look at companies like Telus that have sub 10 million subscribers, and you're looking at organizations like Verizon or Vodafone that have well over 100 million for quite a while now, we just don't have scale economies that we can bring to bear. I think a very interesting case in point would be looking back on the GSM CDMA 2000 dichotomy back in 2008. If you were looking for an iPhone in Canada, or before that, a BlackBerry Pearl, or wanted to have global roaming, there was essentially one provider, and that was the Rogers organization. Ourselves and Bell were precluded because we made the CDMA 2000 technology path bet along the way, and we didn't actually secure the iPhone until we made the move to wideband CDMA. By contrast, we tried to negotiate a iPhone solution with Apple, but we just didn't have the influence. Interestingly enough, Verizon, who had the CDMA 2000 network technology deployed, had sufficient girth, size, purchasing power to get Apple to develop an iPhone that was acclimated to their CDMA 2000 technology, and they deployed it on that particular technology platform. We couldn't bring that capability set to bear. And when I look at our supply chain, on the network front, we have a situation right now where amongst Ericsson and Nokia and Samsung and Huawei, effectively there are 4 players, with one player having a question mark over them being Huawei, who's clearly the technology leader when it comes to radio network equipment. So whether it's 3 or whether it's 4, and that's an outcome right now that's indeterminate, we're waiting to hear from our government, that is, the definition of oligopolistic structure, and we just don't have the purchasing power or the scale economies to dictate anything from pricing to technology to certain functionality components, even support mechanisms. We can try and influence, we can try and sell ourselves as a pilot tier 1 country and a great place to develop a business as a precursor to expanding into the U.S., but we're limited on the influence front. As it relates to devices, much more so in Canada than Europe, we are very much an iPhone country with Samsung in the number 2 position. That is a quasi-duopoly. And we live with that reality. We are price takers. We don't negotiate price. We don't negotiate volume. And how we bundle and market also has to have approval from within the supply chain. And that's the reality that we deal with, and that impacts the economics of our business. Lastly, you must admit it's been quite interesting given the amount of time devoted towards wireless pricing within the public discourse over the last few years. To see the absence of that discussion as it relates to the device cost, when devices have gone from $500 to $700 to $900 to $1,100 to $1,500 to $2,000 at the smartphone level. It is curious as to how that particular escalation has been left out of the debate, where by contrast or juxtaposition, the cost on a per gigabyte basis has dropped rather precipitously in that regard. And I note that overall. And then the second component is the spectrum cost component. Depending on whether you're looking at a European example, or a wider global comparator group, 12 to 16% of the inherent cost within our wireless pricing relates to the supernormal prices that we pay in Canada for spectrum versus all of our peer group within the developed world. Those are the hidden costs and the hidden economics of that particular undertaking. And as it looks to our structure going out there versus the structure of our supply chain, it's a complete dichotomy. If you look at the multiplicity of brands in Canada, look at the variety of rate plans that are out there covering premium to value to discount, and all the variations within that, from postpaid to prepaid to low income to voice-based to data-based along the way. I would say it's a very rich choice that we offer Canadians in that regard. That is reflective of a highly competitive dynamic, not an oligopolistic one.
And maybe if I just provide the economics perspective on that, the terms oligopoly, duopoly, most people know what it is, but I think they fundamentally misunderstand it. So as Dr. Crandall mentioned in his opening remarks, network industries, particular mobile wireless, fixed and other industries as well, the high fixed costs, it's just generated, they're so high in a way that the market cannot sustain a very large number of providers. So often people misread that and say, gosh, there's a highly concentrated market. They use merger tools like HHI indices, we talked about those. But there's been I think there needs to be some re-education done in that a duopoly or oligopoly markets, particularly in network industry, can be highly competitive. I'll point you to one market which I've worked in years ago, and that's in Qatar. 2 mobile providers, regulated duopoly, fiercely competitive. Fiercely competitive. They would go and check each other's marketing events out. They would send a spy to the other side to look how much, who attended their meetings. Fiercely competitive. Now, bringing it back to this particular instance, HHI's been used and highly concentration has been used. Dr. Crandall mentioned it. Dr. Jerry Hausman at MIT studied it. Others have studied it. There's no relationship between concentration and retail prices. And so I think we have to be very careful in using these concentration ratio or these simple labels. So I'll point you, and then I was very pleasantly surprised last week when I read Judge Moreira's decision against the state's challenge to the T-Mobile Sprint merger, where Judge Moreira opined saying, depending on the affirmative practices and actions taken by market participants, highly concentrated markets can nevertheless be quite competitive. So at the end of it, you can start observing it's an oligopoly or a duopoly, but that does not prevail you from a competition analysis. And this competition analysis, as I hope you heard today and you read in our work that we provided, is going on. There are affirmative practices here at play, so that the fact that this market is concentrated or might look to a layman as an oligopoly, I think that should be put aside.
I just want to add one more thing on devices. So building on what Darren was saying, at the same time that wireless prices have declined at a minimum of 35%, because that doesn't even factor in the changes in prices in 2019, devices have increased by 200% in cost. And 40% of our customers are now keeping their devices for 3 years. They don't see the cycle of innovation dictating a need to change in 24 months. The advent of good cases and other ways to protect the devices are lasting longer. And they're asking us for longer financing terms. And I think it's also interesting that that is not on the table as another way to provide monthly affordability.
Thank you. No questions.
Commissioner Leisner.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your presentation and the questions you've taken. I was interested in the comments you raised about the higher take-up that you've seen on your flanker brands in the province of Quebec. So I'm wondering, what would be the number 2 and 3 provinces in terms of higher take-up on flanker brands?
I'm just looking for my stats, but it's okay. Our top provinces for flanker brands are Ontario and Quebec. Yeah.
And why, can you elaborate a little bit on why you feel that your flanker brands are more popular in Quebec?
We see one, both our Koodo and Public brand resonate in Quebec. There's a warm reaction to those brands. And in fact, when we have a measurement called likelihood to recommend, which is a measurement of customer satisfaction. Both Public and Koodo are leaders in the industry on likelihood to recommend. So I think there's a resonance to the brand and what they stand for. And we also see from a buying behavior that customers buy smaller data buckets or data plans in Quebec. So they're looking for less for less, and that's suiting the value proposition of both Koodo and Public.
And the simplicity of the value prop.
And also just the simplicity. So you have to also understand that Koodo was the first brand several years ago to separate device cost from the rate plan cost. That transparency of the Koodo tab resonated really well. In addition to that, very simple on the rate plan side, not the complicated data sharing construct that ended up in the premium space. Shock-free data resonated really well in Quebec as well. So I think it was value prop, brand resonance.
And have you seen competition in that marketplace as well on similar type plans and lower costs in Quebec?
Yeah,
to match your.
Yeah, absolutely. There's heavy competition from Fido, from Videotron, from Virgin. Videotron launched Fizz, which actually increased the competition. Videotron is expanding their territories. I think they announced that this morning. It's robust. Yeah.
I was interested in your discussion about your stores and their cross-branding. So I understand from your comments that you either have in your stores cross-branding between Telus and Koodo in some stores, and in other stores, Koodo and Public. But you wouldn't have all three in one store, right?
Yeah, at this point, we are dual branding.
Okay.
But yeah. That's where
my question is, if for consumers that would go online to look at your offerings, would they see the same type of cross-branding online on the TELUS website? Would there be anything directing them to Koodo for a lower cost plan, or on the Koodo website to Public?
Our three websites are independent, so they're not speaking of the other brands. However, what I would say is when customers call looking to change their rate plans or coming up for a renewal, if the right answer is to move a TELUS customer to a Koodo plan, we have all of those procedures in place, as an example. And
so when you have an online chat, let's say, you see that little icon in the corner of your screen, would that happen there?
If that conversation is about a rate plan change or a renewal, and the plans that are available on TELUS do not meet the need of that customer, then there is a process to refer that customer to Koodo.
And what if it's a potential new customer?
If it's a new customer, dual branding stores help a lot because we can talk about the fuller value proposition, which we do. In cases where we have a mall where we're not dual branded, our stores will refer back and forth.
I'm talking about if I'm online on your TELUS website as a potential new customer, and there's the online little chat icon saying, how can I help you? and I say I'm looking for an occasional use plan for my elderly mom who only uses it when she's out of the house, she has a landline in the house, would the online chat say, oh, well, go to our public mobile website or Kudo or whatever?
Yes, if it's an online chat, it's effectively, that chat is being done by one
So
of
it's
our call
not
centers.
just in the case of a request for a renewal or a change of plan, it would also apply to a potential new customer online?
It could potentially, yes. Our websites do not actively talk about all of the brands, but we have procedures with our call center agents to make the appropriate referral. So our call center agents are the ones who are doing chat. So therefore, I believe that same.
So when you say
there.
call center chat, it would still be a completely online experience as opposed to a verbal
it's just a chat with a live agent. Yeah.
I just wanted that clarification.
Jim, maybe.
I think I'm fine with that answer. I understand what you're doing.
One of the things that maybe that we could do, particularly as it relates to new customer acquisition and the distribution across public, Kudo, and Telus, would be to confidentially file with the Commission so they could see the percentage of our growth coming from public, percentage of our growth coming from Kudo, and percentage of our growth coming from Telus. I think that would be very enlightening information in terms of where we are emphasizing and where we are harvesting new growth in the marketplace.
Great, thank you. I had a question about your network sharing agreement with Bell, and I wanted to understand whether your customers experience dropped calls when they travel to the Bell network.
So let me answer that. There effectively is one common RAN, one common radio network across Canada for both operators. The distinction between both operators is actually made at the core. That's quite deliberate. We did it at the core level because that ensured that core is where the services are applied. So that's where the competition kind of exists, and so we did it very much on purpose to create that competitive network. So there is no handoff because it is actually the same radio network.
Okay, so when I asked this question of Bell yesterday and was advised that there is no seamless roaming between Telus and Bell, it's because it's not necessary because the customers share one network, and so your customers would not have that experience that was relayed by some of the interveners that appeared before us the previous day.
Yeah, that is correct. That is correct.
Thank you for that clarification.
Just to be clear as well, the customers also share the spectrum.
Right. And then my last question is for Dr. Dipon. And just to better understand the study that you did you indicate in your study that in providing your study based on an analysis of flanker brands that it covered a certain percentage of mobile wireless in Canada, but did not cover the percentage of mobile wireless in Canada that is not represented by flanker brands?
I'm sorry, I'm not following the question.
Well, when you were alluding to some of the comments that the Competition Bureau raised in connection with your study,
right,
and that your study dealt with data of flanker brands when you analyzed pricing. So I'm just wondering whether in your study you indicated that the extent of the market that you were studying in Canada was the market of flanker brands, which did not encompass the whole market of wireless that would be covered by non-flanker brands.
Right. So I certainly explained my methodology in my report, but importantly, I also provided statistics for the separate subgroups. So you can look at it by city, by province. You can look at it without flanker brands. You can look at it without prepaid. And so you can evaluate the study, the report, in various different ways.
So did your study then include non-flanker brands?
Well,
like the...
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I know.
Couple of final matters. Pardon me. Final questions from my part. Maybe just a couple of cleanup things. In the opening remarks, paragraph 19, I think it was, you made reference to a 2020 study entitled The Key Cost Drivers of Wireless Service in Canada from Christensen and Associates. I don't think that's part of the public record. Could you undertake to table that?
We will absolutely undertake to table it.
Thank you. Earlier, when Mr. Entwistle was saying yes a lot, I had an urge to intervene and ask a question. You generously offered to provide earlier materials you had presented your board with respect to your pricing plans that would demonstrate to the Commission that you were responding on a broad base of not responding to the Rogers offer specifically, but rather had been responding to a number of competitive stimuli in the market for an extended period. I guess in the spirit of sharing that kind of document, would you be prepared to do so in relation to 5G deployment plans? Obviously, in confidence, could you undertake to provide us with similar strategic documents that you might have provided to your board, for example, in the last 2 years?
So the answer to the second comment, Mr. Chair, is yes. I'm happy to give you a view as to our 5G deployment plans from inauguration to the roadmap prospectively. Eros is quite correct that 5G is not a one-and-done launch. It's not a sprint, but rather it's a marathon. As we progress through initial deployment at the AWS 3, AWS 4 level, as we begin on the rural front, lighting up 600, as we hopefully secure 3.5 gigahertz spectrum, and then laterally millimeter wave. There's an appetite, obviously, for larger channels to be secured to support the type of bandwidth and speed that's part of the 5G promise overall, and the commercialization of that technology to support the products and applications that have been frequently talked about in terms of what the future is going to look like. So we, in confidence, would be pleased to share that with you.
Thank you.
The other thing that I think is important, our move as it relates to our endless data plans, what we did on device financing or family discounts, what we call peace of mind, if you will, was not just related to external market stimuli. That was, yes, an explanatory variable that influenced us. But it was also driven internally by our customers first ideology and a smart simplification bent that was part of our digital transformation activities. Our business on the wireless front had become unwieldy. Our premium brand Telus was dying on the vine. Our loading, had effectively disappeared at the Telus level. And we were deeply disconcerted about what was happening with that particular brand. We needed to resurrect it, to rejuvenate it, to give it a new purpose in life, if you will. And that particular path for this organization to eradicate that complexity was actually born out of the success that we had with Koodo. With the tab, the simplification components, it was easier to sell in the channels. We got consistent feedback from the likes of Best Buy that the reason that Koodo does better, it's just a simple story in an n factorial world. And we said, why don't we take those principles at Koodo and blow it out? Because at the end of the day, We can't manage the voluminous number of rate plans that we have, and we'll never realize our digital transformation and our systems undertaking unless we rationalize significantly within our portfolio. That was a big component of our driving ideology, and that was under the customer's first bent at TELUS. It was those two things acting in harmony, the external stimuli and the overall smart simplification bent to better serve customers.
Thank you. Thank you for the elaboration. I didn't mean to oversimplify the reasons you had identified earlier. I guess my last is partially a question, partially a comment. You've made your case that there is no competition problem, there's no pricing problem. What is then the problem, is the question you asked. And your answer, first and foremost, as I understand it then, is it's one of consumer awareness. Is that a reasonable summary of what you're saying? There is obviously concern among consumers, expressed in response to our surveys, expressed in myriad forms, about pricing, whether well-informed or not. And so that concern exists. So am I correct in understanding your explanation for that ongoing concern or frustration as a lack of understanding of the offers that are in the marketplace?
I think that's an accurate depiction, I'm sad to say. I think part of the culpability sits with the industry, that we could have done a better job articulating everything from affordability to value to the world leadership that we consistently exemplify when it relates to the performance of our networks. It saddens me greatly. But secondly, there's been a cacophony out there of rhetoric at the political level that I can tell you categorically is untrue, and it's emanated from all of the political parties, and it's taken place now over multiple years. And to say that statistically that's not had an impact on the psychology of Canadians would also be erroneous. I think the amount of misconceptions, untruths, falsehoods that have been perpetrated related to affordability within our industry has had an impact on the psychology of Canadians. I can also tell you that it's interesting if you look at the impact that it's had on our employees. Our industry employs directly almost 400,000 people, and indirectly, if you look at the supplier ecosystem, almost 2 million people. When you look at the Morneau-Chappell study of our industry, the number of mental health issues and claims within the telecommunications industry, according to the Morneau-Chappell data, is 2 to 3 times higher than the other industries in Canada. And yes, a part of that's related to cost pressures that we face, related to pricing affordability. Some of it's related to the dynamic nature of technology change. But a lot of it has to do with the abuse that's been hurled at our industry. I would also note within the Morneau-Chappell study that the people most affected within our industry, and certainly within the TELUS company, are people under the age of 40, millennials, as it relates to the 2 to 3 times preponderance of mental health claims that are taking place that are now become fundamentally characteristic of our industry. And I would say, given you've got resources at your disposition, independent resources like Stats Canada and chief statisticians, rather than us quoting independent study after independent study after independent study, or as happened today, quoting a study done by someone within the government of BC, or studying the wall nordicity report, or citing what took place within the Competition Bureau study, why can't we have Stats Can go and do an independent evaluation of the studies? and say, okay, are they based on accurate parameters? Is the study methodology robust? Is the data analytics depth of data not just robust but accurate to draw inference from? So that we can establish a baseline in terms of knowing the facts and then making decisions based on the facts for the greater good of Canadians. I would say that would be a very positive step forward, because if we can agree on the facts, I think it becomes much more easy to agree on what the right regulatory framework is to progress it for the benefit of Canadians.
Thank you for that suggestion.
Allow me to jump on this. When I was a regulator, we have been faced with a very similar problem. It's the awareness issue. How can we people make more aware of what's in the market? Not only what are the dangers, what are also the opportunities. And when we did a consumer empowerment program, and I started a video blog, and I blogged every month on an important subject, whether it's security of your devices or email or whatsoever. And one of the things was, go to your shop and ask the sales agent for what is the best plan for me, so that people going actively to the shops or visit the websites or whatsoever and ask for the things they are really using. So that's coming from two sides. It's not only the sell side, also the buy side, to empower the people. And that worked very well.
Thank you. Those were all my questions. Commission Counsel, were there any remaining questions?
Yes, just a few, Mr. Chairman. In your opening remarks at paragraph 33, you refer to a 2020 study by PwC. Could you undertake to file that on the record as well?
Yes. Yes, we will do that. That's a study that looked at wireless affordability with us at 1.6% of disposable income, Australia at 2.1 and the U.S. at 2.6, as well as the study that looked at price, access, and latency of wireless networks that ranked us #1 in the G7 plus Australia. And it also reached the affordability conclusion in terms of Canada being better than the U.S. and Australia, importantly across all income quintiles, which I think speaks to the breadth of coverage of the multiplicity of brands and value props that we have within the market.
All right, thank you. And if I understand correctly, earlier there was a discussion about providing statements showing cash flow between 2014 and 2019. Can you just confirm that in providing those, you would be able to clearly delineate the portions of it that deal specifically with wireless versus wireline or other expenditures?
Yes, but I think it's important to understand that the fiber build program at Telus, which really got going in 2013 and scaled in 2014, was not undertaken just as it relates to high-speed access or pay TV, but was done as a pre-positioning, if you will, for 5G, given that the performance of a wireless network is predominantly determined by the underlying wireline network that does the front-haul delivery of the wireless traffic or the backhaul redistribution. So there's a certain amount of intermingling as it relates to that fiber expenditure that's both for the benefit of high-speed internet, but also as it relates to 5G. But we'll illustrate that particular component for you as it relates to the audited number that we're providing, by the way, which is minus $6 billion 2014 through 2019 by Deloitte. And that's a Sarbanes-Oxley 404 disclosure measure for us, for which we, both myself and the CFO, are legally culpable for, so to speak, as to the accuracy of that information.
Thank you, and there could be some explanatory text elaborating on what you've just said as well. That would be fine. And finally, Commissioner McDonald had discussed the operational side of a potential mandated low-cost plan. You had asked whether you'd like to discuss the legal side as well. We can discuss that now. I'd refer specifically to the response you provided on the 18th of February to an RFI that was posed on the 23rd of December. That was question number 7. In that document, you had stated that in order to mandate such a plan, the Commission would need to perform a market power assessment on the relevant market, and that in your view, low-cost or occasional use plans did not represent such a market. So my question would be, is there some other basis upon which the Commission could perform a deforbearance analysis? It's been suggested that perhaps on the basis that a certain segment of vulnerable consumers were not being sufficiently protected. Again, it seems clear that your view is that that is not the case, but at a higher level, would it be possible to even approach the question through that lens, in your view?
I mean, you regulate sort of polyphonically on a technical basis, financial basis, social basis. So you have other options for looking at problems and thinking about remedies. We don't think you have to do anything. We've been probably too clear about that. But you have other options if you need them. And I guess I'd add, just to echo my written answer, Section 24 doesn't afford you a route to rate regulation. That's properly the province of 25 and 27.1. And basket clauses, beware of stretching them too far. I think the courts and others have been clear about that.
Understood. If there was to be, though, a deforbearance or a reassertion of those rate regulation powers, in your view, can you get to that place by looking at whether it's necessary to do so to protect the interests of vulnerable consumers, or do you have to perform the market assessment, in your view?
I'm gonna start and answer. My expert colleagues might want to jump in as well. It's not entirely clear that it's a market failure if someone can't afford bread or rent or telephone service. It's a different kind of failure on the income side, and it needs a different kind of remedy. So I think you're getting to a point when Jim has 77 cent a day plans in market. My kids have $8 a month public mobile plans. What's that, 30 cents a day? And there's some point when it's almost free, but it might still be too expensive for some people. And that's a very serious problem, but I don't know if you can fix it by changing the price of any one good or commodity. It's a poverty problem and probably not a regulatory problem.
All right, thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Mr. Chair, just before we wrap up, one of the conversations that we didn't exhaust, and it cuts to your comment on being more transparent in communications, maybe more effective on the communications front, as it relates to the MVNO mandating, and as Stephen articulated, you clearly already know our position, and that we don't think that there's an issue to solve for either as it relates to affordability or quality. There's been a lot of conjecture related to disinvestment or reduced investment. It's been a high topic related to what will happen as it pertains to MVNOs being introduced, or another 25% price reduction being enforced, having already bettered the existing one that's in place. And there are some views that this is just theater perpetrated by the incumbents, and that if mandated MVNOs come to fruition, or there's an enforced second-tier 25% reduction, we will go on with status quo investing. So one of the additional things I would like to file with you in confidence that I've brought here today is a board resolution at Telus signed by all of our board directors, instructing management to pursue an investment reduction plan and a job reduction plan and a philanthropic giving reduction plan should these eventualities present themselves. And we're discussing numbers where the reduction, and we'll go public with it, but I'll file with you the board resolution, in the vicinity of $1 billion of reduced investment over the next 5 years. The reduced employment is in the zip code of 5,000 jobs over the next 5 years. And I would ask that as we look at holistically on the eve of 5G, what's the right thing to do for Canada, that we include quantitatively all of these factors and reach a net conclusion as to what is the best way forward. Is it the continuation of facilities-based competition, or is it a divergence thereof? And the one that is deeply problematic to us is the paradoxical or oxymoronic one of a facilities-based MVNO, which is just wrong from theory to practice, but certainly the hybrid model is not required for entities that are well capitalized to build out themselves to seize the market opportunities that they deem to be appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Your position is clear. It's well understood. And if you feel it's important that you file the document as in the form of an undertaking, that's fine. We'll be prepared to accept that. And again, thank you for your submissions and your responses, and I bid you well. We'll recess for 1 hour, return at 2:15. Thank you.